Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
You're 5 years old. Daughter, congratulations, Mom exclaimed, entering the living room, where at the festive table gathered all the relatives, headed by the birthday girl. In her hands she held a huge cake, on which burned 5 candles. Well, come on, my girl, make the most cherished wish and try to overnight all the candles, pronounced Daddy, hugging the girl by the shoulders. I want. She thought for a second and looked around at everyone present. I want that we never parted, loudly said the girl and almost whispered added. And also this beautiful doll that we saw in the store. This one, asked the grandmother, and, opening the closet, took out the very doll that Evelyn had recently seen in the store and squeezed her mother's ears. What a big and beautiful toy it was, and how Evelyn would like it. But then her mother had been adamant, noting that they wouldn't spend that much money on such an expensive toy. Seeing the gift, little Evelyn was confused at first. She froze in place and looked at the doll and at her grandmother. I still can't believe what is happening. Honey, you're not happy? Grandpa asked. Why are you frozen? Birthday wishes should always come true. Evelyn smiled and clapped her hands in delight. She ran up to her grandmother and held out her arms in anticipation of the gift. When the cherished doll was in her arms, she looked at her grandparents and whispered, Grandma and Grandpa, you are the best in the world. Cindy and David, next time, consult with us before you give such expensive gifts. Are you spoiling Evelyn? And admonished the pensioners in a disgruntled voice, the mother of the birthday girl. And I don't think we should indulge a girl's every whim. But her husband's parents disagreed. Maria, who else should we spoil? Grandpa stepped in. Who knows what will happen tomorrow and how long we have left? And what's wrong with a child to be happy? Especially she is our only granddaughter, added the mother-in-law. Evelyn was used to such conversations. She paid no attention to these words because all her thoughts were already in the yard with her favorite doll. The girls would burst with envy. No one has such a thing, reflected, smiling girl. Maria sighed heavily. She had nothing to say. She lived here on a bird's license. Her mother-in-law ran the apartment. Maria had met William at a friend's party 8 years ago. The guy fell in love with her, and as they say, at first sight. At that time, Maria had a young man whom she dreamed of marrying. But only this young man had completely different priorities. As he himself told her more than once, he hadn't piled on yet. What was the point of rushing into it? Maybe we're not right for each other, he explained to her while he looked around. Actually, I'm 21. Maria insisted. It's time for a family and kids. Why procrastinate? Especially since we've been together for 2 years. But he ignored all her arguments. Maria was angry, but she was patient and waited. Suddenly, she was invited to a birthday party in a tomb. There were a lot of people at the party, and William was among them. He immediately attracted attention. The girl stood out too much from the crowd, despite the fact that he was tall, handsome, polite, and expensively dressed, which spoke of his rather financial condition. But for all that, he was very shy. But even his modesty did not prevent him from asking Maria out on a date. And on the second date, he asked her to marry him. Maria was well aware that she had no feelings for him, but she really wanted to take revenge on her ex. Therefore, without thinking, she gave her consent. And in a month and a half, the girl stood in the registry office, in white, and mind-blowing wedding dress. Everything as it should be. Then a motorcade of several cars drove them around the city, and all the girlfriends were bursting with envy. Yes, Maria, you're lucky to get a guy with money and an apartment. Yeah. Well, what are you gonna do with your parents? They're not forever. But in the center of the city, you'll live like Christ at your side, they told each other. After the ceremony, the newly wedded couple flew to the sea and a whole week enjoyed the sound of the surf and basked under the hot sun on the hot white sand. Maria was over the moon with happiness, but the euphoria quickly passed and the reality remained. Back home, they plunged headlong into everyday cares. William was at work all day long. Maria was finishing her degree in knitwear. The spouses saw each other only at breakfast and dinner when William came home. But Maria was satisfied with this state of affairs. Finishing her studies, she met every day with her girlfriends. Did they gossip in cafes or sing karaoke? She met her ex a couple times. He held the hand of his new party and pretended not to even know Maria. His indifference was a terrible blow to the girl's ego. And she vowed to herself, "In spite of you, I'll be the happiest woman in the world." The young couple lived in the center of the city in a two-bedroom with William's parents. The apartment, of course, was not huge, but there was plenty of space. The big room was given to the young, and in the smaller one the owners themselves organized. My mother-in-law continued to run the household, and Maria was very happy about it. "You have your whole life ahead of you to prepare and clean," Maria's mother-in-law kept saying. "Children will go quickly. All you learn to cook and wash and iron. And while there is time, enjoy life." Maria liked this life very much. After graduating from technical school with a specialty, she decided not to go anywhere and went to work as a clerk in the nearest store to the house. Paid, of course, a little, but it was enough for little girls. Weekends she went with her friends to the disco, periodically acquired. William did not say a word to her. He himself was happy to see his young wife happy and satisfied, and his friends couldn't stop admiring him. You could only dream of such a thing. They talked about William. He doesn't limit anything, doesn't reproach anything, doesn't forbid anything, doesn't yell Maria. Should you carry him in your arms? Oh no, he should thank all the gods that I met on his way. Laughed the young woman in response. Few people would agree to live with a mother-in-law and mother-in-law. "Come on, your mother-in-law is a saint," exclaimed back her friends. "On such a one only pray." "Well, then pray," parried Maria. "I'd rather live separately, but it's probably more convenient for my William." With sadness in her voice, cried the woman. A year after the marriage, Maria realized she was pregnant. William was incredibly happy. He literally carried his wife in his arms. Cindy and David were anxiously waiting for their granddaughter to be born. They worried about their daughter-in-law, did not allow her to do anything, so that she would not suddenly get tired. They controlled her diet, her sleep. Mother-in-law freed her from all the household chores, although in principle Maria and before did not help much. And she was fine with it. But still, every chance she got, she reminded me, "The apartment is not mine. What right do I have to manage and change anything?" When Evelyn was born, and Maria didn't feel very excited when you were pregnant, you thought you were ready for motherhood. And when the baby girl came into the world, she was a very annoying young mother. I didn't realize she would need so much of my attention. She took up all of my free time, and she was soul-crushing. Maria friend. Everyone said that the first year, the baby only sleeps. But that's not really the case. Not only does she wake up with the roosters and nice outside during the day, but at night she wants to play. Can you believe it? And I'm exhausted. I want to sleep too. And the figure of a girl. Look at what I look like. Instead of breasts, there's some kind of sacs. Her stomach hangs. Maria, we don't understand. We don't understand, her friends objected. Your mother-in-law is dusting you off. All you have to do is raise your daughter, and that's all you do. That's easy for you to say, William. He doesn't help me at all. A girl comes home from work and goes to bed. She plays with her daughter for maybe 15 minutes, and that's it. That's interesting. So you want your husband to work and take care of your daughter. And what will you do? Sleep. I don't know, but my daughter's not just mine, she's ours. That means that both of us have to take care of her. Time flew by. Evelyn grew up. She learned to play on her own and sleep longer. Maria went back to work, and she was glad she did. Every day in the mornings, she took the girl to daycare and flew to work. In the evenings, she did not hurry home. She liked to sit and gossip with her friends, drink tea, discuss the latest news. She didn't worry about the girl because she was sure that her father or grandparents would come for her. Evelyn did not reach for her mother and did not miss her unnecessarily. She loved her father madly. And about the grandparents there is nothing to say. The child simply idolized them. And those in return did not dote on his granddaughter. William also adored the girl, but because of work could not give her much time. But when in those rare free moments they went out for a walk or to have fun. Little Evelyn remembered it all for a long time and remembered at any opportunity. And recently he promised to give her a small kitten. Evelyn clapped her hands in delight, but she immediately blew it off. Mom probably won't let him, she said quietly, looking into her father's eyes. Well, let's not tell her anything yet. And we'll see. Maybe I can talk her into it, Dad promised. The day before her birthday, Evelyn and her parents went shopping for a new dress. And that's when she noticed the beautiful doll that stood on the highest shelf. While her mother tried on her cover and twirled the girl in all directions to assess how well the new outfit fit, the girl kept her eyes on the toy. If you want, you can choose another dress. Which you like the most? Smiling, offered Maria. Can I not have a dress? I'll have a doll. Of course not. Immediately the mother replied with a refusal. Look how much it costs. No toy can cost that much money. It's not gold after all. But the grandparents decided to fulfill the dream of their only granddaughter. And the girl was so happy. She had already decided to go to the street to show her friends a new doll. As suddenly froze on the threshold and listened. Her attention was attracted by a quiet squeak that came from the bedroom. Putting the doll on the floor, she decided to check what the sound was. Looking into the room, the girl saw a huge box with a bow in the center. Quickly opening it, she shrieked in surprise. Inside the dolls was a tiny gray kitten. Evelyn immediately ran out of the room and threw herself around her father's neck. Are you the best daddy in the world? She whispered in his ear, simultaneously wiping away tears of joy with her small palms. Then she rushed back and pulled her pet out of the box. The girl gently cuddled him to her and closed her eyes. This is the best birthday ever, she whispered. And when Evelyn left for the yard, Maria let her emotions run wild. You could have consulted me. I understand that my opinion doesn't matter to you. One gave an expensive doll, the other brought this furry monster. The woman was offended that her gifted dress was the one the girl liked the least. She almost cried with resentment. I want to remind you that I'm raising her alone. I'm trying to raise her to be a human being. All you can do is pamper her and let all my labor go to waste. And then Cindy, Maria, came to her son's defense. Her tone was steady and calm. Can't you rejoice with us with your daughter? Instead, you're only on her birthday. What's so terrible about a child's wishes being fulfilled? Your dress is also incredibly beautiful, but you have to realize that she's only 5 years old. And at that age, she likes toys more than outfits. That's not the point. The daughter-in-law was falling apart more and more. It's just that you all try at every opportunity to point out to me that I'm a bad mother, a worthless wife and mistress. But here you are wrong. Maria calmed her mother-in-law. Just by virtue of youth and inexperience, you do not yet understand many things. But all this will come with the years. So you're saying I'm not capable of anything. Maria, stop yelling at Mom. William suddenly spoke up. We're living in their apartment with everything. They're the ones helping Evelyn and me. And you have to admit, without my parents, it would be a little difficult. Evelyn spends most of her time with them. You have no right to raise your voice to your mom. Have you ever wondered why I still live here? Maria turned to her husband. Because my husband is so comfortable with Mommy. He hasn't even tried to get his own place. Every day I hear people saying we have to wait. We have to be patient. It'll be here soon. Yeah, I've been living on your promises for years. How much longer do I have to wait? William was silent. Cindy and David watched their son with a measure of sympathy, and after a little silence, the man said, It's a shame. I wanted to give you an anniversary present, a surprise, so to speak. But I guess I'll have to give up that idea. I've got the money for the apartment. I've saved up. This weekend we can drive around and see what's available." Maria was speechless with surprise, and immediately there was no trace of resentment. She instantly cheered up, ran up to her husband, and threw herself on his neck. His parents left the room, leaving the couple alone. They were really happy for their son, that at last he would be able to buy his own place. But it was still unsettling. They understood perfectly well that Maria is not ready for an independent life, but maybe she will learn everything faster. "My father-in-law said, 'We can only believe it,'" nodded his wife. William and Maria soon bought a one-bedroom in a residential area. But the young wife was happy about that too. During the move, she only kept talking about how the girlfriends would get a place to live. But she was not happy for long. Independent life without her husband's parents was not so simple. Now Maria in the morning not only hurried with her daughter to kindergarten, but in the evenings took her away from there, because William did not have time to do it. And when she came home, she didn't go to her room to rest, but hurried to the kitchen to prepare dinner for the weekend in non-stop mode, when she had to do an incredible number of things in just 2 days. She didn't even want to remember. The woman had forgotten the last time she had gone out with her friends. Nerds were on the limit, and they scandalized her and her husband constantly, and for any reason. Maria often took it out on little Evelyn. And as a result, the girl became silent and withdrawn. Once at work, Maria's colleagues decided to organize a corporate party. Maria warned William in advance that today he had to pick up Evelyn from daycare. William agreed and left for work. In the evening, Maria's phone was ready to explode with calls. William and her mother-in-law tried to call her alternately, but Maria persistently did not pick up the phone. She realized that now she would have to go to kindergarten to pick up her daughter and disrupt her corporate event. But when an unfamiliar number popped up on her cell phone, the woman answered. "Maria, are you picking up Evelyn? The garden has been closed for half an hour already." The kindergarten teacher expressed her dissatisfaction. "I'm on my way," muttered Maria. In response, and glancing at her watch, hailed a cab. All the way she tried to call her spouse, but his phone was disconnected. After apologizing to the disgruntled kindergarten teacher and gathering her daughter quickly, she went outside. On her way home, she pushed Evelyn up every now and then, dragging her by the arm. The girl could barely keep up with her irritated mother. She heard her mother cursing at her father, calling him selfish, irresponsible, a worthless husband, and a disgusting father. And as they approached the driveway, suddenly the phone rang again. Looking at the screen, she saw that it was her mother-in-law. "What do you all want from me?" she whispered out of breath, angry at having disrupted the party. "Yes," barked the woman into the phone. "Maria's unhappy. Or an old woman. William's been hospitalized. I don't understand you at all. Can you explain what happened?" Maria asked, not hiding the irritation in her voice. "William was in a car accident." She tried to explain clearly, swallowing her tears. "He's in surgery now. I've been calling you all evening, but I couldn't get through." Maria left Evelyn with a neighbor and rushed to the hospital. The doctor met her there and informed her that William had died without regaining consciousness on the operating table. Injuries incompatible with life. They did everything they could. It took Maria a while to realize what the doctor had said. The woman looked at her husband's parents, sitting in an embrace on the couch. Cindy was roaring in her voice, and David, pale as a sheet, was clasping his grief-stricken wife. The whole week that followed was a blur. Black robes, lots of sad people, most of them strangers, and suddenly no one. Empty in the apartment, empty in Evelyn's soul, the only reminder of the past. The girl was more withdrawn than ever. She like a shadow wandered around the apartment, moving silently, and in her little heart settled universal sadness. But time does not stand still. Gradually Maria came to terms with the loss. Unlike her daughter, who missed her daddy madly until now, the girl spent all her time playing with the cat that her father had once given her. The grandparents supported the granddaughter as best they could and often took her to their home together with her father. Only their care and love helped the little girl to come back to life. And when Evelyn went to school, Maria brought her suitor to the house. "Let's get acquainted." She introduced her daughter to him. "This is my daughter Evelyn. And this is Uncle Mark. He will now live with us, which means that he is now your daddy." The girls were not thrilled with their mother's new acquaintance. He was short, unshaven. He was the exact opposite of William. The man reluctantly extended his hand to the girl, but the girl responded by hiding her palm behind her back and whispering, "My daddy died." And soon Uncle Mark moved his things out. The relationship with Evelyn was not getting better. The girl did not want a strange man to live with them. And on the shelves of the father lay his things, but no one was interested in the opinion of the little girl. The mother was completely dissolved in the new relationship. She tried her best to please the gaggle, forgetting all about her daughter. Cindy and David were worried about their granddaughter. They saw how Evelyn treated her mother's roommate. They often took the girl to their house. Well, it was not as often as they would have liked. And soon Maria announced that she was pregnant and that she and Mark had decided to get married. And when Mark began to live in their apartment on the legal grounds of the spouse, then for Evelyn began an unbearable life. Stepfather constantly scolded the girl, punished for every little thing. And the mother turned a blind eye to everything, supporting the methods of education of the new husband. After a while, the family became bigger by one little man, who was named Vanessa. And all the attention of Maria and Mark was riveted to her. All their free time they tried to spend together with the little girl. And when the mother needed to do something around the house, Evelyn played the role of a nanny. At such moments, Evelyn looked at the baby's tiny hands and fingers with curiosity. She talked to her and gently stroked her head, which was covered with a delicate tuft of hair instead of hair. Evelyn had no jealousy or dislike for her little sister. She believed that when Vanessa grew older, they would surely be friends. As time went on, the stepfather and stepdaughter relationship never got better. Evelyn's presence. Mako was annoyed, and he didn't even hide it. And one day, Evelyn overheard her mother and stepfather talking. "Are you out of your mind?" Maria was indignant. "Where can I put her? I propose to sell this apartment because one room for everyone is not enough. We'll buy a 2 or 3. Then the problem with your daughter will solve itself," Mark reasoned. "But that's impossible. I must get the consent of my father-in-law and mother-in-law," replied the woman. "Here are their shares after her husband's death." "Well, then we must explain to them that we're all cramped in here," Mark insisted. When they saw Colia, they were immediately able to. And a couple of days later, when Maria brought Evelyn to her grandparents to visit, she decided to talk to them about it. After listening carefully to her daughter-in-law, her mother-in-law asked, "Maria, do you know for sure that you will find a place for Evelyn in the new apartment?" "What do you mean by that?" The woman was surprised. "I'm suggesting another option." My father-in-law entered the conversation. "You're going to take out a mortgage anyway, right? So let us buy out your share, and that way everybody's happy. You get the down payment, and we get the memory of our son." Maria didn't like that offer. She planned to get the whole apartment, but on the faces of the elderly couple realized that they would not agree to more. So she nodded in agreement. Cindy and David sold their favorite dacha, where they spent a lot of time in the summer car and garage. The proceeds, it was enough to buy out Maria's share and Evelyn's share. Maria was surprised, counting the money they received. "Evelyn, this apartment will be a gift from us when the girl grows up," Cindy clarified. Mark was the most unhappy about the whole situation. "Then let your daughter stay here." The man did not stop resenting. "Otherwise, I'll take her to the army and dress her, and then she'll burst into flames and go to her apartment. And she won't even say a kind word to me. I'll be paying this mortgage for the rest of my life. And these juvenile runaways are already in and out of the apartment." "Mark, I couldn't change anything. I tried to justify myself." "Don't be mad. We'll make money. We'll pay it off quickly. What are you going to earn?" Igor started a husband in his store with our income, as if not to starve. But I want to remind you that the idea of a spacious apartment was yours. Maria smiled. Who knew that this house was not yours? Admitted her husband. If I had known, I wouldn't have been here. Mark, what are you talking about? Maria was frightened. I don't believe that you're with me only because of the apartment. No, don't worry about it. I didn't mean it like that. The man came to his senses and took his little daughter in his arms and ran up to him. He adored Vanessa. It's just that this injustice makes me angry. So one of your daughters has an apartment and the other one's broke. But Vanessa has a father. And Evelyn only got an apartment from her father, Maria parried. They ended up buying. They are two-room. One room was allocated to the parents, and the second served as a bedroom for the girls. The sisters grew up amicably. The older sister gladly took care of the younger one, and the younger one paid the older one with her love, which Evelyn lacked in her new family. Evelyn still paid no attention to her except when she needed to be scolded or punished for something. We had always been cool to Evelyn, and with the birth of her daughter, she had grown cold to her. And one day, when Evelyn was in 6th grade, the girl came home earlier than usual. Mom was at work at the time and Vanessa was at daycare. The stepfather had been staying at home for a few days. He had recently been fired from his old job and was on the lookout for a new one. Upon entering the apartment, Evelyn was struck by the woman's shoes at the door. Her mom had never seen those before. Seeing the loss, Mark became furious. "Why are you here so early?" he shouted. "Lessons are not over yet. Our teacher got sick and canceled." Evelyn excused herself for the last class, staring at the unfamiliar shoes. "And we have someone visiting." "No, they're the neighbor's shoes. She was just leaving," the stepfather replied, noticing the direction of his stepdaughter's gaze in the room. Evelyn obediently went to her room. After seeing her off, Mark went to her room. "You've got a lot of homework." Evelyn looked at her stepfather. It was the first time the man asked her about her studies for all the years of living together. "No," the girl answered. "Evelyn, you see," the man was hesitating, obviously choosing his words. "You probably do not tell your mother that the neighbor came. Otherwise, she'll just make up stuff." "What is there to make up?" The girl didn't understand. "Nothing. It's very simple. Don't tell everything." Evelyn did as Mark asked her, but it did not escape her attention that the relationship between stepfather and mother had become somewhat strained. They were often scandalized, accusing each other of every mortal sin. It was not uncommon for the girls to get into trouble if they got in the way. Evelyn stayed with her grandparents more and more often because that's where she was loved. And once, when the house was quiet after another scandal, Evelyn took a suitcase and put her things in it, told her mother, "Sile, I have no more patience for your husband. I'm tired of your constant bickering. Now I will live where I am loved and expected." Maria calmly accepted this fact, and deep down she felt relieved. At first she didn't even ask her mother-in-law how her eldest daughter was feeling. Evelyn didn't waste any time. She tightened her studies, corrected all the bad marks, which recently became more and more. Teachers also noticed positive changes in the girl. She began to smile more often. She cheered up. And Evelyn did not even remember her mother. The only person she missed was her little sister. By graduation, Evelyn had already decided what she wanted to be in the future. And her choice was a psychologist. "Yes, I've made up my mind," she told her grandparents. "Especially since our university has a department of psychology. And I've found out. Well, it's not a bad choice," supported granddaughter David. "Psychology is a serious science," agreed Cindy. But Maria, hearing about her daughter's decision, frankly laughed. "Is it a profession to work? A vest for strangers?" She expressed her opinion. "Don't you have enough problems of your own? You're digging into other people's problems. Why are you doing this?" Evelyn's mother's reaction didn't surprise her. She probably, in her heart of hearts, was prepared for the fact that her parents would not support her. After all, Her mother ridiculed all her ideas from childhood and called them delusional. "Well, at least I can understand you," explained the daughter. "Why do you so much time looking into the mouth of a man who does not put you in anything? How can you love him more than your own children? How can you have the conscience to say such things?" The woman was outraged. "Mark raised you, replaced your daddy. Vanessa adores him. Everybody fights. That's how life works." "Mom, do you really mean that?" Evelyn was surprised. "He's a bum who sits on his neck all the time. He can love, but not me. And he could never replace my daddy. Your husband is a total Alfonso, a womanizer and an egomaniac. He's no match for daddy. It's your choice, and you have to live with it. And I have no right to judge you. But don't glorify him in my eyes. I'm not blind." Listening to the eldest daughter, Maria, from indignation, could not utter a word. And when she was silent, he only gritted his teeth. "How ungrateful you are." But Evelyn only smiled at that. She remembered that she had never regretted it since she had left her mother's house. But why should we? The girl was unfazed. "I am immensely grateful to my daddy, from whom I got wonderful genes. I am immensely grateful to my grandparents, who loved me and put their souls into me, taught me forgiveness, and most importantly, to appreciate what you have. I am even grateful to you for giving me life many years ago, and most importantly, for not talking me out of leaving you back in the day. I am grateful to Vanessa, who loves me and sees me as a human being, unlike you and your husband. But I have nothing to be grateful to a stranger who came to our house on the spot and did nothing to earn my trust and favor." Maria remained silent, and only with a frown at her daughter, she left the apartment. Evelyn entered the psychology program. She was very happy with her choice and graduated from the institute with a red diploma. Next, Evelyn, several other graduates, as the best students, were sent for internship in one of the centers of psychological help to people who found themselves in a difficult life situation. The girl was incredibly grateful to fate that she got such a chance. Cindy and David were proud of their granddaughter, and at the graduation decided to give her their gift. "Evelyn," her grandmother addressed her, "you know that your grandfather and I love you madly and want only one thing, for you to be happy. We are proud of you and hope that you will continue to develop in the same direction you have grown and are ready for independent life." So we decided. Grandma paused to brush away the tears that were running. "We decided to sign over your father's apartment to you." Grandpa came to the rescue. Evelyn couldn't believe everything that was happening as she stood in the very apartment where she had once been very happy. "I thought it had been sold," she admitted. "Mom had told me that they had put the money from its sale as a down payment on the apartment they were living in now." "Yes, we bought her share then," David admitted. "So that's why you're left without a car and garage." Evelyn guessed. "And we don't regret it," smiled Cindy. "You're our joy. You're all we have left, William. So please accept our gift as a token of our undying love for you." "Thank you." Through tears, Evelyn thanked them. "I love you too. You are my most dear people in this world." Soon, Evelyn moved into a new apartment. It was harder to visit her grandparents every day, but she called them every day to check on their health. Having finished her internship at the Psychological Help Center, Evelyn was offered to stay there to work. The salary, of course, is not very big, but you will get an incredible experience, said the head of the center, holding out the employment contract for her to sign. Evelyn, not thinking long, agreed. During the year, she got used to the team. But most of all, she liked to help people. After all, it was thanks to her efforts that people became happier. And from this realization, she got inexplicable pleasure. Vanessa often visited her older sister. From her, Evelyn learned news from home, although it was hard to call it news. In her mother's family, everything was the same. Mark was still out of work, but he claimed to be on the lookout for a decent job. "I've even seen him with other women a couple of times," Vanessa admitted. "I think he's cheating on Mom." "Vanessa, don't you worry about that." Her sister advised her. "The parents will figure it out. It's not a big deal to pry into a couple's relationship. Believe me, It's a thankless task. Vanessa nodded in agreement. Do you mind if I crash at your place tonight? The school canceled classes for tomorrow, the little sister explained. We're going to the exhibition. No problem then, Evelyn said happily. Such evenings the sisters stayed up late. They had something tasty for dinner and talked for a long time, drinking tea with candy. Vanessa shared her secrets with her sister and asked her opinion. She asked for advice, shared her plans for life. Evelyn listened to her with pleasure. She liked that despite their different fathers and age difference, they were very close. On the day of her 25th birthday, Evelyn did not organize a lavish party, but decided to celebrate modestly with her family. All were invited, except for her stepmother. But her mother, citing indisposition, also did not come, congratulating her daughter on the phone. Vasilieva sat all evening, was not herself, did not answer questions, all the time translating the topic of conversation. We'll marry you off to a reliable man, then you can die with peace of mind, David said. Grandpa, what are you talking about? His granddaughter stopped him. You have great-grandchildren to nurse. God willing. God willing, Cindy whispered softly. But fate had its own plans for her. 6 months later, her grandfather died of a heart attack, and her grandmother outlived her husband by only 1 year. But before she died, she made a will for Evelyn. To Evelyn's surprise, Maria showed up at her mother-in-law's funeral. In all these years, they had not spoken to each other. She hadn't been to her grandfather's funeral either. And this is a surprise. I'm glad you're here, thanked her eldest daughter. How could I leave you at a time like this? Replied the mother. And here everything is the same, she said, looking around. The wallpaper has just been changed, and the furniture is still the same. Mom, what are you talking about? You couldn't believe your ears, could you, Evelyn? The same thing. Mother explained with a shrug. It's been so many years since your father and I left this apartment, and it feels like yesterday. You could change the furniture. I don't think this is the time to discuss it, Evelyn said. And I want to remind you that my grandparents took care of me, fed and clothed me. And you cut me out of your life. As soon as the front door slammed behind me. Oh, don't push it. Maria waved me off. I was always thinking about you, but I realized that you'd be better off here. A month later, her mother came to Evelyn's house to have tea and cake, which surprised the eldest daughter incredibly. What a surprise. Evelyn couldn't help pouring the tea. Did something happen? Maria asked her nonchalantly. I'm your mother, after all. Can't I just visit my own daughter? No, of course you can. It's just strange why the thought never occurred to you in the past few years. She admitted it, but it still feels good. Maria silently looked around, as if in between asked, What will you do with the apartment? Nothing, noble. I'll move here. You're alone. Why do you need a 2-room apartment? Well, first of all, it's not just an apartment for me, Evelyn explained. This is my home. It's where I grew up, where I was happy. And 2, it's in the center of town. It's a 5-minute walk to work. And after a little silence, her mother asked again, And 1 room, it will be empty. No, Evelyn assured her. I'll rent it out. The mother's face showed that she was not satisfied with her eldest daughter's plans. Soon, Evelyn renovated the 1-bedroom apartment as she had planned and moved in, renting out the studio. At this point, Vanessa was already in her first year of college. Maria continued to meet regularly with her eldest daughter. Her plan was to get Evelyn to sign the apartment over to Vanessa. Why would I give my apartment to Vanessa? I didn't see what Evelyn had to do with it. But you two are friends. She's your little sister, you know, she's your younger sister. Maria's older daughter. That's selfish of you. I inherited the apartment from my father. Vanessa has her own father, so let him worry about his daughter's future. Evelyn. Well, you know very well that Mark can't offer her anything, her mother persuaded her. But seeing that Evelyn was adamant, she went for broke. And to be fair, the apartment is also mine, so I'm also an heiress and have a share in it. I did, agreed the daughter. until she sold it to her grandparents, and their will was, "Do you like it or not? And I will not violate it." "Yes, Mother, you certainly are." Mark was indignant. "You can't even reason with your own daughter. What can I do?" "It's all according to the law," answered Maria. "Both apartments she inherited. I'm powerless. And what does the law have to do with it? When it's about family," the man insisted. "Where does she need so many apartments? Is she going to salt them or what? Why couldn't she live in a one-room apartment? She could have given her sister a two-bedroom. Especially since Vanessa is getting married. Kids will be here soon. Where can we fit everything in here? I, for one, don't want to share an apartment with a strange man." "Well, your suggestions. I've talked to Evelyn many times, but she just keeps saying what's mine, and that's it. So we'll just have to play it cool if she won't take the easy way out." Mark suggested it. "She's renting out a one-bedroom, and she doesn't care who she rents it to. So she should rent it to Vanessa. What difference does that make?" Maria didn't understand. Evelyn wouldn't charge her own sister. Her conscience won't allow it, the mayor explained. And if her conscience allows it, then in a couple of months we'll say there's no money. Young family, so and so. Evelyn will not throw Vanessa out on the street. Maria thought for a moment. Her husband was right about some things, but the whole situation was a mess. It didn't seem right. The wife hesitated. Of course it was. And when one of the sisters is bursting with wealth and the other is starving, is that right? When Vanessa came home from school, her father decided to talk to her. "Daughter, Mom and I consulted and came to the conclusion that it is wrong when one sister has everything and the other has nothing." "I'm referring to Evelyn's apartments now," Mark explained. "She'd inherited them from her father." The girl reminded him, "I don't have a claim on her." "Maybe you don't, but I do," the father said irritably. "Greed and selfishness must be cut off at the root. What do you want?" "I don't understand you," Vanessa asked, and the father laid out his cunning plan to his daughter. Vanessa listened carefully and turned to her mother. "You agree with him?" Maria is not sure. She shrugged her shoulders and then answered, "But you have to live somewhere. Your James is a country boy. You can't live in a dormitory, and renting is expensive. You can't afford it. It's better than all of us living here. So you've decided to take one of Evelyn's apartments. I'll find the words. I'll put Maria's daughter in her place. We're talking about your sister." "Exactly. And from the outside, it looks like she's our blood enemy," Vanessa retorted. "Mom, Evelyn, your own daughter, is just like me. She's been through enough in her life. She's basically an orphan with her mother alive. I wouldn't wish that on her. And now you want to take away the last thing she has. What are you talking about?" Maria was outraged. "Yes, my father and I care about your future. And I think my father's plan is a good one. Didn't your father try to start doing something and earn his daughter a place to live? Has that idea ever occurred to you? I see Dad talks a lot, but he doesn't do anything. I didn't expect you to be so mean," said Vanessa and ran out of the house. She slowly took the street and pondered on what had happened. Vanessa loved her older sister, and sometimes she didn't understand why her mother was so cold to her. What could be so wrong with the child to kick her out to live with her grandparents? Didn't her mother miss her? Didn't understand that her behavior only increased the gap between them? Many questions arose in Vanessa's mind. She walked without making out the road, and when she raised her head and looked around, she realized that she was standing in front of the center where Evelyn Vasilieva worked. Had been here a couple of times, but then she hadn't paid any attention at all to the visitors to this establishment. Today, as she was walking up to her sister's office, she was met by several women. They were all different in age and status, and in appearance, but there was one thing they had in common. In each one's eyes sat a deep sadness, to say the least, a detachment. They'd probably lacked love too, Vanessa suggested. Sis heard. Suddenly, she heard Evelyn's voice behind her. "What are you doing here?" Inviting her guest's office, Evelyn poured tea and sat down next to her sister. "Are you sad?" she remarked. "Did something happen with James? Did you have a fight or something with Mom?" "No, They're fine, Vanessa reassured her sister. A more expectant look came over her, but the girl remained silent, hesitant to speak. There was a feeling that she regretted her coming. Evelyn did not insist on speaking. She silently drank tea and occasionally glanced at her sister. "Olga, do you love your mother?" Suddenly Vanessa asked. "What a question, of course," without thinking, answered the older sister. "And why did you ask about it?" "Well, because I always wondered why she treats us differently," the girl confessed. "At one time I even thought that you were not her own. She's always neglected you." "Why? I don't know why you're bringing this up all of a sudden." Evelyn smiled. "But I just thought if I had 2 children I would love one less too." But Vanessa smiled at Evelyn and hugged the girl. "It's wedding jitters. All mothers love their children equally, and you will love both. So why are we treated so differently?" Vanessa wouldn't give up. "I've often wondered about that too," Evelyn admitted. "But I think my mother resents my father for leaving her alone with a baby in her arms." She shared her assumption. "Well, that's silly. First of all, how can you take offense at a dead person? And secondly, what did the child have to do with it?" The girls drank their tea in silence, each thinking about something else. Finally, Evelyn stood up, cleared the table, and sat down next to her sister, took her hand and said, "It will be different for you. Do you and Serioza love each other? And children will be born. You will love them. And Mom." Evelyn was silent for a few seconds and added, "Mama is just an unhappy woman. She should be understood and pitied. After her first marriage, she was left a young widow, and her second husband turned out to be a loser and an Alfonso." "Yes, I understand everything," Vanessa replied. "I love my dad, but he really, all his life, lives at Mom's expense. One thing I don't understand is why she put up with all this for so many years. Does she really love him? She's probably driven by fear. She's afraid of being alone," said Evelyn. "But she won't be alone, and we're being childish," said Vanessa. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, and a middle-aged woman came in. "Evelyn, we need you." She disappeared as suddenly as she had appeared. "I have to go." Evelyn got up from her chair and walked over to her sister. "It was good to see you without filling your bright head with bad thoughts. You're going to be fine, and I'll always be here for you. And if you need anything, I'll be there for you." "I never thought that my daughter was so selfish." Maria expressed her displeasure when Evelyn once again refused to give one of the apartments to her younger sister. "But I guess I should have raised her better." Evelyn smirked. "And the grandparents, I see, didn't do it at all," surprised the mother. "They did, but they did it as they saw fit. And you have no right to judge them. They replaced my family, not you." Maria didn't like that kind of talk. She couldn't take criticism of herself, especially about her daughter. It probably hurt her that Evelyn was telling the truth, and Maria felt deep down guilty about her older daughter. Vanessa was preparing for the wedding. The date had already been set, invitations sent out and rings bought. But when Evelyn was offered the position of manager of the new branch of the Center for People in Difficult Situations, she hesitated. "But I'd have to move to another city. I can't leave everything now, and there's a lot to leave." The director wondered, "What or who's stopping you?" "It's not that." Evelyn was embarrassed. "It's just that my little sister is getting married soon." "That's fine. You'll take a walk and go." She offered to fix up the branch. "Come back here in a couple years and take my place." Evelyn had no more arguments to refuse. The colleague who rented her apartment had also moved to another city. So Evelyn, knowing that the newlyweds had nowhere to live, offered them a one-room apartment. For the time being, until they solved the issue of their own housing. Vasilieva was overly grateful to her sister, and the stepfather was dissatisfied. And he didn't hide it. "You could have offered a 2-bedroom. He grumbled. After leaving, Vanessa often called Evelyn and shared the latest news. One day, she blurted out that her mother was on sick leave. Something had Evelyn seriously worried. There was silence on the phone for a while. And then Vanessa laughed and said, "Don't worry, it's nothing." And after the conversation, Evelyn couldn't find room for worry. She felt that Vanessa was not telling her the whole story. Then Evelyn decided to call her mom. Maria didn't answer right away, but when she picked up the phone and heard the voice of her eldest daughter, she could hear that she was genuinely happy. She surprised her daughter. Vanessa said that you are on sick leave. Oh, under the ball also cheerfully answered the mother. A couple of sneezes, and she has already panicked. Mom, is it something serious? Don't worry, I'm fine. Why don't you tell me what's new with you? When do you plan to come back? Not for a while. The work here is just getting better. I don't think we'll be fully operational until 6 months from now. Mark got a job. Well, he's been moonlighting here and there. Maria was floundering. I see. So he didn't get a job. Oh, daughter, I have to go. My mother was in an unexpected hurry. Sorry, not missing, she said and quickly hung up the phone. Evelyn listened to the short beeps for a while longer and looked at the cell phone, not understanding anything. This conversation seemed strange to her. Usually her mother was always dissatisfied, but here she was chirping cheerfully. 6 months flew by for Evelyn like a day, and the work in the branch was established. After the inspection, the bosses were not stingy with compliments. Evelyn was proud of you and her team. On top of that, she had a man in her life. They met Nick at the center. He worked as an ambulance doctor and once came to a call. He saw an elderly woman who had been beaten up. She refused to be hospitalized, but she was too scared to stay at home. Do you think this is the first time he's beaten me? She confessed to the doctor. I'm used to both of them. But this is the first time I've seen him this angry. Maybe the doctor suggested the police. Oh, no. What are you doing? The woman was scared. He'll do time and come back. Then I'll be dead for sure. So why are you with him? The man didn't understand. Where to go? No children, no family, no friends. This Herod took everyone away. Nick felt genuinely sorry for the old woman, and he suggested that she go to the new center for helping people. Not immediately, but still she agreed. Nick drove her himself and put her in Evelyn's hands. And then several more times he stopped by the center and was interested in the well-being of his ward. The young people's working relationship quickly turned into sympathy. A month after their first meeting, Nick introduced Evelyn to his parents. Despite the fact that Nick and Evelyn were almost the same age, his parents were quite old, intelligent, courteous, pleasant to be around. They reminded Evelyn of his grandparents, and from that day on, she became a frequent visitor to their house. When are you going home? I asked Nick. Tomorrow morning. The young man's eyes immediately became sad. I'll be waiting for your return. I will quickly come to settle everything with the documents. Come back. The lovers could not part for a long time. They stood in silence and held hands. And the next day, close to lunchtime, Evelyn already reached home. Closing the door behind her, she gloried against the wall and remembered with pleasure the happy moments of life in this apartment. When her grandparents were still alive, her memories were interrupted by the phone ringing. Yes, I'm listening, she answered. Hello, sis. Vanessa's familiar voice sounded. Are you back already? Yes, I'm home. After a little silence, Vanessa said into the phone, I didn't want to tell you this, but you're going to find out anyway. Mom's in the hospital. Let's meet her off the phone. I'm going to visit her this afternoon. You're coming with me to settle the formalities of transferring to the hometown to be the director of the help center. Evelyn met with her sister. After much hesitation, Vanessa confessed, My dad beat up my mom. She's lying there with a concussion and 2 more broken ribs. That's not counting the bruises, contusions, and abrasions. And I'm guessing it's not the first time. Evelyn guessed. Well, yes, she'd been on sick leave a few times, so she wouldn't have to go to work with bruises. But this was her first time in the hospital. Why didn't you say anything? My mom asked me to. We filed a police report. No, that mom doesn't even want to hear about it. A nurse stopped the girls at the checkpoint. It's not allowed for 2. You go. Vanessa suggested and handed her sister a robe. When Maria saw her eldest daughter, she cried. Evelyn's heart squeezed. The always indifferent, always disgruntled, stern woman now looked like a wounded bird. Evelyn wanted to hug her, to hold her close, to pity her and promise that everything would get better. But she held back. She sat down next to her on the bed. The young woman inquired, "How are you feeling?" "Well, I'm fine now," the mother replied, wiping away her tears. "Maybe you can tell me what happened." Maria silently turned away to the window. Tears flowed from her eyes again. She was ashamed to admit to her daughter what had happened. "Mom, I can help you," Evelyn said, "but you have to want to." Maria remained silent, swallowing her tears. "Mom, why did Mark do it? He's been drinking lately." Finally, her mother spoke, and it was taking a lot of money. "And my salary is not much. So when I turned him down, he beat me. And this time, Mark brought his drinking buddies and I refused to set the table for them. Why do you put up with it? You could leave him and live in peace. Go to the police. Don't you want to tell me you love him?" "I'm afraid of him," Maria confessed. "I'm very afraid of him. He will never leave me alone." "Let's make a report to the police first," suggested Evelyn. "No. What are you afraid of, Maria? You can't even imagine how this will end. What can he do? Have you forgotten where I work? And Mom, I listen to stories like this every day, and I know for a fact that if you sit back and take it, nothing good will come of it. Either we get him out of your life, or I'm leaving, and I'm never going to help you with this again." Maria thought for a moment, and then whispered, "Okay, I'll do as you say." Upon learning of the statement, Mark came to his wife to confess. He swore and swore that it would never happen again, that he would work and stop drinking. But Maria, on the advice of her daughter, was adamant. After his wife's refusal, Mark instantly became furious. Losing control of himself, he began to shout and threaten to kick her out of the house. The guards chased the man out of the hospital and, at Evelyn's request, informed her of the incident. In the evening, she went to her stepfather's house after hearing all of his threats against her. Evelyn pulled out her phone and turned on the voice recorder, which was perfectly audible. "I'll pass this on." In a calm tone of voice, she said, "And if you try to carry out any of your threats, you'll go to jail for a long time. I've made sure of that. What do you want?" Mark asked when he realized he was trapped. "Mom's being discharged soon," Evelyn replied. "She needs to rest. That's why you have 3 days to move out." "Yeah, sure," grinned the stepmother. "Look for the fool. I'm as much the boss here as she is." "You forgot about Vanessa and me," Evelyn replied. "You don't seem to care enough. So you've got 2 apartments. None of your business. You had nothing to do with my apartment or this one. You didn't put a dime into it. What's the difference? It's the law. The laws I know. It's jointly acquired property and will be divided equally. That's if you don't get locked up before you divide it." Evelyn smiled. "What do you want from me?" Peace March asked again. "You get out of here, and Mom will take a statement from the police. But I have nowhere to go," Evelyn said, very confused. "As far as I know, you have a lot of friends." "Igor first, Evelyn. Ask them if they'll take you in." In the end, Evelyn, together with a lawyer from the help center, helped her mother divorce Mark and kick him out of the apartment. He spent a long time looking for arguments in his favor, but his stepdaughter's threats to put him in jail were more convincing. Having collected his things, he left on his return home. Maria took a long time to get used to the fact that she was the only one who owned the place. She also needed psychological counseling, and more than one to get away from the stress. Evelyn helped her mother as much as she could. It seemed to her that during this period they had become closer than they had been in their entire lives. Her mother was genuinely happy every time her daughters came to visit. And soon Vanessa announced that she too would soon become a mother. And Maria was worried about her studies. "It's no big deal. I'll take a leave of absence." In the hustle and bustle of daily life, Evelyn never got around to telling her family about Nick, despite the fact that they chatted at length on the phone every day. The man was looking forward to seeing them, but he wasn't being let go from his job, as there was a staff shortage. Evelyn had not been able to make it. "Well, I can't leave my mom right now. She hasn't fully come to her senses yet," she explained. Then one day Maria invited her eldest daughter for a walk. Lately they often walked together, discussing the news. Talking about distracted topics, Maria said, "Olga, I thought long and hard and came to the conclusion that I want to give Vanessa my apartment. After all, she and James are going to have a baby soon. They just need a permanent place to live." "Yeah, it's your apartment. Then you can do whatever you want with it," her daughter agreed. Evelyn wasn't going to claim her mother's place, but she felt bad that her mother didn't even think about it. Well, just for decency's sake. After all, she had her share of the apartment. "Yes, you're right," nodded her mother. "Vanessa will probably be pleased. But you know what I don't really want." Evelyn looked at her mother questioningly. "I don't want to be a free appendix in this apartment." "What do you mean by that?" The daughter didn't understand. "A young family should live separately," Maria explained. "Maybe I can live in your apartment." Evelyn was not surprised by her mother's question. Perhaps she had expected it and was somewhat upset. It seemed to Evelyn that her mother had fully realized her mistakes and was doing her best to correct them. But as soon as she recovered from the divorce, she was back to her old ways. Under different circumstances, Evelyn probably would have given her mother permission. But now her resentment for her spoiled childhood, for her mother's lack of love and affection, flared up in her with renewed vigor. She turned away so that her mother would not see her weakness and said, "I'm sorry, but I have other plans for my apartments. I need them." "What other plans?" I got angry. "Maria, you wouldn't dare leave your mother on the street. I dare to remind, not long ago, I already helped you not to stay on the street," answered Evelyn, turning around and looking into her mother's eyes. "And I did everything possible and impossible then. And if today you've got it in your head to give the apartment to someone else, I don't hold it against you. That's your right. But it's not my fault." "Well, first of all, it wasn't someone. It was your sister, Maria. And secondly, I didn't ask for help. You're the one who got involved with Mark. You're the one who pushed for our divorce and then kicked him out." Evelyn was horrified by those words. All her phantom hopes for their rapprochement and warming relationship had crumbled like a house of cards. She wanted to scream and cry herself to tears. But Evelyn, clenching her will into a fist, calmly said, "I thought you didn't mind getting rid of that drunkard and tyrant who asked you to think at all." The mother parried. "Before you came here, I had a husband who loved me and beat me out of love, I suppose," added Evelyn. "Yes, there were disagreements between us, but like everyone else." Ignoring her daughter's words, Evelyn continued, "How would you really know? You don't have a family." Her mother's last sentence caused Evelyn great heartache. Like a hurt little girl, she wanted to hurt her abuser too. "So whose credit is it that I didn't have a family?" she shouted out, barely holding back the tears that were choking her. "My family is my grandparents. It was they who showed me what it should be without humiliation, without scandals and manhandling, where people love, respect, and appreciate each other." After listening to her daughter, the mother cooled down a bit. She tried to justify herself. It came out rather awkwardly. The woman was either reading something, but Evelyn couldn't hear her. "While I believed I was helping you get rid of a tyrant husband, you've been plotting to get your hands on my inheritance," she suggested. "And you know what I'm going to tell you. Mommy, I have a fiancé. His name is Nick, and he's an EMT. We're getting married soon. He's got a job in D.C., and I'm going to transfer to his new branch of the Metropolitan Care Center. And if everything works out, we'll sell these apartments to buy one in D.C. Any other questions for me?" Maria stood with a confused look and didn't know what to say to her daughter. She just remained silent, looking at her and batting her eyelashes, and all we could say was, "We're going to stay here." "Are we staying here?" "Yes. Imagine, We each have our own lives. Evelyn answered and turned around and walked away from her mother. And the next morning at exactly 6:00 a.m., her cell phone was ringing off the hook. Evelyn, I understand your mother correctly. You decided to kick us out on the street. Territory. Little sister into the phone. What are you talking about? Me. I don't understand, Evelyn clarified. I didn't quite understand exactly what she was talking about. My mom told me, Vanessa replied, that you're moving to Washington and selling all your apartments. That's true. Well, most likely, Evelyn agreed, gradually moving away from the basics. When were you planning to tell me? Suddenly shouted Vanessa. You know my situation. I'm not allowed to be nervous or anxious, and you didn't even deign to inform me that Serioja and I would soon be homeless. I think you're being a little dramatic. Sis, Evelyn tried to calm her down. Sis, Vanessa asked her again. Yeah, a real sister wouldn't do something like that. You know very well that we have no place to live. First you invited us here, and now you want to send us away like dogs. What about selling the apartment? Don't you think that's despicable? Evelyn was finally waking up to her sister's attacks. She was uncomfortable with the tone in which Vanessa was speaking to her. I take it this is in lieu of a thank you, she clarified. I'd like to remind you that I called you in temporarily, not permanently. You and James wanted a loan. Isn't that right? I just wanted you to keep your rent down. What mortgage are you talking about? Was Vanessa nervous? Yeah, we're struggling to make ends meet. James has time to study and work, but his salary leaves a lot to be desired. We can't even go to the movies, let alone make a big purchase. But I guess you'll have to move in with your mom. Evelyn suggested it. I don't think she'd mind. I'm sure she would. And Vanessa said, unlike you, my mom doesn't spare anything for me. She wanted to give me her apartment, but you ruined it. And how did she do that? Let me ask you something. Your selfishness. Vanessa was going, and she couldn't stop. You've been spoiled since you were a kid. You're used to everyone dancing around you. You want to study, get an apartment. You want an apartment for another one. And how do other people cope? Didn't you care? Evelyn, listening to her sister, couldn't stop wondering if her mother was so acutely ill. Vanessa couldn't have changed so much. After all, for so many years she had been an attentive, loving sister. What happened? Pretending. Thoughts swarmed through her head. Evelyn listened to the profanity and tears streamed down her cheeks. Everything she believed in and aspired to was crumbling before her eyes. The people who were closest to her had betrayed her once again. Evelyn had no desire to prove or explain anything. Taking a deep breath, she wiped away her tears and said in as calm a tone as possible, I'm sorry, sister, that I'm not what you wanted me to be, but mine will continue to be mine. And yours? Yours? And she immediately dropped the call. The clock read 600 am. There was a ringing silence. The city was slowly waking up. Evelyn kept replaying Vanessa's words in her head. Everything swam before her eyes, and she wanted to scream, but her strength was gone. Tears streamed down her face, and her heart was beating as hard as if it wanted to jump out of her chest. Evelyn was pulled out of her daze by the phone ringing. The name Nick popped up on the screen. Shaking her head, and to bring herself to her senses, she answered the call. Good morning, beloved. The young man said cheerfully hello. I hope I didn't wake you up. I have some good news. Good morning to you too, Nick, Evelyn replied, trying not to show her distressed state. I'm awake now. Did something happen to you? You've been crying. No, I'm fine. Just a little cold. But it's really bad timing. Nick lamented, and I finally settled on a transfer. He starts his new assignment in a week. I wanted to see you. You're welcome to come. I'd love to. Well, then I'll pack all my things not to return and come to you, said Nick. And you don't shell out. Drink tea with raspberries. Believe me, I'll be as good as new by the time you arrive. 2 days later, she met Nick at the train station. The man was glowing in part. Dropping his suitcase, he ran up to Evelyn. and taking her in his arms, began circling her in place. "At last we are together," he rejoiced. Every day Nick brought his favorite breakfast in bed and greeted her with a hot dinner from work. While Evelyn was away, he fixed the faucets that had long been poking up, changed the hinges in the kitchen cabinets, hung the portrait of her with her grandparents that had been on the table for several years, sent against the wall. In short, redid all the man's chores. In the presence of Nick, Evelyn felt happy and loved. The week flew by like a single day. On the eve of departure, Nick and Evelyn took a day off. In the morning, the lovers did not live in bed for a long time. And then, while the young man went to the train station for tickets, the hostess prepared a delicious lunch. Having bolstered life, they decided to take a walk around the city. Holding hands like schoolchildren, Nick and Evelyn slowly shaved through the park, enjoying the fresh, frosty air. They were warm and cozy with each other. The time flew by. Nick invited Evelyn to the restaurant for dinner. A glass of wine, light appetizers, romantic ambience, quiet, peaceful music. Everything contributed to making this an unforgettable evening. Nick took Evelyn's hand and looked intently into her eyes. "Will you marry me?" Suddenly he asked, and taking advantage of the girl's interference, pulled a ring box out of his pocket. At that moment, Evelyn's heart was ready to jump out of her chest. She had been waiting for Nick's marriage proposal for a long time and was ready to accept it. But she had no idea that this moment would be so exciting for her. She happily replied and extended her hand to the young man. Soon Nick left for the capital, and Evelyn stayed in her city to wait for a transfer to another branch. Having seen off her fiancé, she plunged headlong into work. Being preoccupied with other people's problems, the woman forgot about her own. Firmly decided for himself not to dig into the past and leave in relations with his mother and sister, everything as it is, she calmed down and got on with her life. Accepting the marriage proposal, Evelyn asked Nick to dispense with the lavish celebrations. The bride and groom agreed to get married at a Washington, D.C. registry office after Evelyn's relocation was resolved. By that time, Nick promised to settle the question of rent. Spring was in full swing. Nature was leaving its winter hibernation, and the riot of colors around created a joyful mood. The Gulf, birds singing on different voices, made hearts flutter. To top it all off, Evelyn was waiting for her transfer to Washington, and she couldn't wait to see her beloved. Nick, as promised, prepared everything for the bride's arrival. He rented an apartment for the first time, adjusted the household, studied the real estate market. And so the long-awaited day came. Evelyn gathered all the things necessary for the first time. She made an agreement with a realtor about selling her apartment and set out for a new life. All along the way, she thought about the last conversation she'd had with her mother and sister. "You are a bad daughter," showered her mother with accusations ungrateful. "I gave you life. How could I take care of you? Yeah, you went to live with your grandparents. But that was your decision, and I didn't kick you out. It's not my fault you couldn't get along with Mark. I didn't have to be alone for the rest of my life because of you. I was too young when I was widowed, and I needed a man. And you know, not everyone would take in a child, and Mark took you in. And you kicked him out of the house. You always made sure I was lonely because you're selfish. I don't think anyone needs him but you," Evelyn replied. "If he whistles, he'll come running. You have no right to insult him. He's my father." Vanessa stood up for him. "I've always loved you and respected you as a big sister. You've been my role model. But I didn't think any apartment would come between us. Nor did I expect the price of your love to be an apartment," Evelyn argued. "You're ungrateful." Vanessa echoed her mother's accusations. "For you, material things were more important than family ties." "That's not true," Evelyn replied. "I never stopped loving you. But you, when you learned that there would be no division of my inheritance, quickly abandoned me." Maria and Vanessa proved Evelyn and her wrong for a long time, trying to press on pity and conscience. But their arguments did not work on Evelyn, giving them a chance to speak. She walked away with the words, "I will not allow myself to be manipulated, but I think the grandparents foresaw this situation, so they disposed of their property this way and not the other way around. If you can't be happy for me along with me, I won't bother your eyes and will leave. I don't want anything from you, but I don't owe you anything either. Do you have a husband?" She turned to her sister, "So earn your own apartment, and if you can't, ask your father for help." In a new place, Evelyn settled in quickly. The team was new and young. There was a lot of active work, but Evelyn always got home on time. She gave herself the attitude that family was the most important thing in her life. The appointed date of the first day of summer Nick and Evelyn signed. As agreed, they did not invite guests to their first family party, deciding that it was just for the two of them. It was Maria and Vanessa, and still there was no word. But the realtor found buyers for the apartments to resolve the sale. She took 2 weeks of unpaid leave and went to her hometown to settle the formalities. Evelyn was about to return, but before leaving she decided to visit her relatives. Approaching her mother's house, she saw her sitting on a bench in the yard. It had only been 6 months since they had last seen each other, but it seemed to Evelyn that she had aged a lot in that time. Maria sat alone and concentrated, staring at one point in front of her. Sadness and longing were imprinted on her face, barely noticeable. The wrinkles before had become deep. At the sight of Evelyn's mother, everything squeezed inside. In that moment, she wanted to hug her and feel sorry for her, maybe even apologize for what she'd said in the heat of the moment. On impulse, Evelyn rushed to her mother's side. But at that moment, Mark came out of the driveway. When she saw him, she quickly got up and followed. Evelyn stopped, seeing off her mother and stepmother. She experienced a gamut of feelings, pain from another betrayal, anger, self-pity. Barely holding back tears, she turned and ran back. But at that moment, she heard a familiar voice calling her. "Evelyn, it's you." The girl stopped and, turning her head, saw her sister with a bag in her hands. And despite her exhausted rhythm, she looked more beautiful. Pregnancy was in her face, flipping from foot to foot. As Vanessa jokingly approached Evelyn, "How long ago did this arrive?" she asked, as if nothing had happened. 2 weeks ago. It's a long time. I'm leaving today, and I've come to take care of some business." Vanessa was silent, trying to formulate a question. "Yes, I just wanted to stop by and say goodbye before I left," Evelyn explained. "But no one was home. You must have missed your mom," Vanessa suggested. She was getting ready. The girl was silent again, clearly not saying the right thing. "To leave. Is everything all right?" "Yeah, I'm fine." "Then I'll go," Evelyn said and turned around. "Why don't you come over for a visit?" Vanessa asked in an uncertain tone. "Not tonight. Some other time," Evelyn promised, and started to go on her way. But her sister called out to her again. Evelyn turned around and saw Vanessa's guilty face. "Evelyn," she addressed her sister as before, "I'm sorry for what I said to you the other day. You know, hormones. Don't hold it against me. I don't know what came over me, but you're right. I had nothing to do with your inheritance. You're the only heir to your dad and his parents. Yeah, I wasn't so lucky with my dad. He never thought about me. He's lived his whole life and continues to live only for himself. What did my mom see in him?" "Don't worry," Evelyn reassured her. "I'm not mad at you. I understand. Everyone can make mistakes. The main thing is to realize it in time and repent." Evelyn walked over to Vanessa and hugged her, pulling her close to her sister. She felt a push in her stomach and bounced away. Vasilieva smiled and put a hand on her tummy and said, "Well, they're from the tribe," and met. The girls both laughed. After the conversation with her sister, Evelyn felt as if a mountain had fallen from her shoulders. The only thing that kept her thinking was, had her mother really gotten back together with Mark? Had she forgiven him? Evelyn hesitated to ask Vanessa. She was afraid to break the fragile peace that had formed between them during their last meeting. "Why would you even want that information?" "I don't understand," Nick also asked. If your mom is fine with it, then you shouldn't even care. You know, Nick, whatever she is, she's my mother, and I can't live with that monster around. Evelyn justified herself. What if he hits her again? But you can't stop your mother from talking to him. It's her choice. You're right, I agree. Evelyn, sighing heavily. And then there's your sister. I don't think she'll let you hurt her mother, Nick said before leaving. Then, turning the key in the lock, he kissed his wife on the cheek and disappeared out the door. Evelyn thought about it for a while longer, but gradually everyday tasks distracted her from the bad thoughts. She plunged headlong into her work. On weekends, the newlyweds traveled from morning to evening to look at apartments. They decided not to hurry with the choice, especially since Nick's apartment was not for sale. On the secondary market, nothing suitable for our money. Disappointed, said Evelyn, returning from another viewing. Maybe we should look at new buildings, Nick suggested. They have lower prices. Yes, but we don't know when the house will be finished, and then we'll have to make repairs. You need a lot of money for that too. So it's better to make repairs again than to redo them. With optimism in his voice, said Nick. The next weekend it was decided to look at apartments in houses under construction. After waiting for the end of the work week, the couple were going to the construction company when Evelyn's phone rang. Hi, sis. She said hello cheerfully, answering the call. However, James' voice came out of the receiver. Evelyn, it's not Vanessa, he said. It's James. Something's happened. Evelyn immediately worried. No, don't worry. I said, I'm just calling to let you know you've become an aunt. Our daughter Vanessa was born while she's sleeping, so I thought I'd let you know. Congratulations, shouted Evelyn happily. And maybe you can come visit us too, James asked. I can't yet at work, she explained. But I'll try to come by New Year's Eve, just as my niece will grow up and get stronger by then. After saying goodbye to her sister's husband, Evelyn told Nick the good news, but she noticed that he reacted a little too calmly, even indifferently. I realize that they're strangers to you, of course, but you could have been happy for me. With resentment in her voice, Evelyn expressed her displeasure. I'm glad, Nick replied. It's just that I think it's time for me to meet your family. It just doesn't seem like the right thing to do. We've been married for 3 months, and your mother and sister still don't know. Yeah, you're right about that. But you know how complicated my relationship with them is. Evelyn tried to justify herself. But I promised to make it up to them. We'll go there together in the winter. I'll look at some more apartments in new buildings. The newlyweds chose one. The most like the new neighborhood and all the necessary infrastructure. Constructed yards are arranged for recreation for children and adults. Listed Evelyn. Pluses of this object. Even the metro station is planned to open in walking distance, and a large selection of apartments with different layouts and on different floors, added Nick. And from the window you can see a small pond. Evelyn perked up. I like everything and the price. The price is reasonable for us. Nick. Yes. But if my apartment was sold, we could buy a 2-bedroom in this house. Nick was disappointed. You know, the important thing is to start somewhere. His wife encouraged him. I've got enough money for a 1-bedroom. It's better than renting. Well, yes, you're right. The husband agreed, but his tone was still upset. But don't get me wrong. I've never lived off a woman. And now I do not want you to think that I need your apartment. What kind of nonsense is that? Evelyn was indignant. You and I are husband and wife. It's not nonsense. Nick continued. This question is very important to me. What are you trying to tell me? I just think that if you happen to be buying this apartment, you should have it registered in your name. What's more, I'm proposing a prenuptial agreement. Evelyn looked at her husband, trying to understand whether he was serious or joking. But there was not a muscle on Nick's face. He was determined. Well, all right, she agreed. If you insist. Yes, I want my woman to be sure of me at all times. I love you, my knights, Evelyn said with a smile and hugged her husband. Congratulations to you, Evelyn, said the representative of the man in suit and tie, handing the new keys to the same person. "You are now the full owner of a one-bedroom apartment with finishes." "Thank you," replied Evelyn, and not hiding joy, looked at the people standing on the playground of future neighbors. Keys in a solemn atmosphere handed to all present owners of apartments. Then on the same playground, the developer organized a small amateur concert. And in the evening, Evelyn and Nick Happy returned home and discussed their move to a new apartment. During the conversation, they didn't immediately hear the phone ringing from Nick's jacket pocket, but the caller was persistent. Looking at the screen and seeing an unfamiliar number, Nick was surprised and answered the call. "Hello. Yes, this is me selling. I'll be able to drive up next weekend." "Yeah, okay, you got a deal," and dropped the call. Nick grumbled unhappily. About time. Had there really been a buyer for the apartment? Evelyn guessed. "I think I'm the only one who's found one. What are we going to do with him now? We could have bought that bigger apartment a month earlier, and now we can't sell the new one. Why don't we just not sell your apartment yet?" Evelyn suggested it. "Let it stand." "No, I don't think so. We'll be looking for a buyer for 6 months. As long as there's someone willing to buy it, we have to see it through." "The boss is the boss," shrugged his shoulders, replied Evelyn. And the next weekend, Nick went to his city, and Evelyn, not knowing what to do, walked from corner to corner. And then the phone rang. "Hi," Sis said hello to Evelyn, answering the call. "Hi, Evelyn," said Vanessa, without much joy in her voice. "What's up? What are you doing?" "Yes? I'm thinking about moving to a new apartment. Why are you so sad? Did something happen? I don't know where to start. I got stuck. My sister, Mom, and Dad. Anyway, they're back together. I don't want him to come home. We're too cramped as it is. Dad got a house in the country from his parents, but Mom doesn't want to leave town. Why don't you talk to her?" "Oh no, I'm not getting involved in your business. I've already given up my share of the apartment. We'll take it from here." "Evelyn, what about you? You're definitely not going to claim it?" Vanessa asked. "No, I'm not. Thanks, Sis, you're better than that." With all matters settled in his hometown, Nick returned home satisfied and said to Evelyn, "I propose to buy a plot of land in the suburbs and gradually build a summer house. What do you think about it?" "I think it's a very good idea." Surprisingly, such a plot of land was found very quickly, and on New Year's Eve, the happy newlyweds went to visit Vanessa and Sergei. Hospitable, the hosts gladly painted the gifts brought by her sister and her husband. Evelyn was getting acquainted with her niece, and Vanessa was jokingly indignant. "Here was my sister getting married and not even telling anyone." And when the first passions subsided, Evelyn asked, "Where's Mom?" "She moved in with her father," Vanessa answered dryly. The older sister did not pursue the subject further. The New Year's Eve party turned out to be fun. James Nick. Despite the difference in age, they quickly found a common language. And on the eve of returning home, Evelyn asked her sister, "Have you seen your mom for a long time?" "I haven't seen her since she moved," Vanessa answered, and added that if she doesn't call her, it means she's doing well. Evelyn was a little surprised by her sister's answer, but she remained silent. On the day of the guest's departure, Vanessa received a call from her mother. "Daughter, can I come to you?" Swallowing tears, she asked, "What happened?" "Father, I guess I was wrong to contact him again." "Yes, come over, of course," Vanessa invited in a disgruntled tone. "But only in your former room. Our bedrooms now." "Oh, thank you, Vanessa Sushko," rejoiced mother, not paying attention to the warning. "I'm already near the house. I'll be right in." A minute later, the doorbell rang. On the threshold stood the mother, and seeing the eldest daughter, she fussed, and fixing with her hand the hair that was under the cap, thus covering her eye, said hello. Evelyn noticed a bruise on her mother's face, carefully covered with total cream. "Happy holidays, Mom," Evelyn said, hesitating to go up to her and hug her. "Meet my husband, Nick. And this is my mom." Maria introduced herself and extended her hand to her son-in-law. "I didn't expect you to marry such a handsome man," she said to her daughter. "But why do you have a beautiful daughter, smart and handsome?" "Yes, she got that from me," Maria said coquettishly. "Oh, why are we standing at the threshold? Why don't we sit down and celebrate?" "No, we should get back," said Evelyn. "It was nice to see you. Come visit. Vanessa invited us. Would you like to come?" Nick replied. After the meeting with Evelyn's mother, she felt bad. All the way she was silent. Understanding his wife's mood, Nick did not bother her. And later, from a phone conversation with her sister, Evelyn learned that contacted her father, Alina, addicted to alcohol. And as soon as they get drunk, they start to find out about each other. Vanessa complained. "Scolding turns into fighting. That's why I didn't want my father to move back in." "Why didn't you tell me before?" Evelyn asked. "What difference would it have made?" "Evelyn, you already helped Mom out once. Where's the gratitude? She blames you even more for ruining her family." Evelyn was hurt to hear those words, but she was used to her mother's attitude. "I persuaded her to stay, but she decided to go back to her father," Vanessa continued. "And when I forbade him to cross the threshold of our house, she signed the apartment over to me in solidarity with him and slammed the door loudly. As you could see, their relationship lasted a little over a month. And now she's living with you." "No. A week after you left, her father came for her and persuaded her to come back to him without her realizing it," Evelyn said with genuine regret. "Why should she be so nervous in her old age? Maybe she needs medical attention." "No, I don't think so. I don't think she'd want medical attention." 5 years have passed since then. The sisters still called each other, occasionally visiting. Nick and Evelyn gradually built a house, a sauna, and a gazebo on their country estate. "Our country house is not for work, but for relaxation," Evelyn said. And indeed, on every holiday, and just on weekends, they often went out of town, inviting friends to visit. Once, after a telephone conversation with his mother, Nick asked his wife Evelyn, "Would you mind if I brought my parents to our country house? They're in poor health. They'll be closer to us here." "Evelyn, since the day I met her, I've had a great relationship with my mother-in-law and mother-in-law." That's why she immediately agreed to her husband's proposal. And on the next weekend, the spouses went to Nick's parents and offered them to move into their house. "But what about our apartment?" Mother hesitated. "And what will happen to her?" asked Nick. "Let it stand, she does not ask for bread." After a little thought, the parents agreed. And soon they were already living at the dacha of their son and daughter-in-law, and rejoiced that now they had the opportunity to spend more time in the fresh air. Evelyn was pleased to see the old people happy. She loved secrets with her mother-in-law, as she had once done as a child with her grandmother. Nick's mother was an intelligent woman and tried to stay out of their lives. But there was one question she couldn't stop asking. "Evelyn, why don't you and Nick have children?" she asked one day. "I'd like to have grandchildren in my old age." It was a question that had been on her mind for years. She and her husband dreamed of having children. They examined different doctors, took prescribed medications, but everything was useless. Everyone said, "You're both healthy. Maybe there's an incompatibility between you." And no one could tell you what to do about it. Evelyn had given up hope of becoming a mother. And once in a conversation with her husband, she even suggested that he break up with her and find another woman who could bear him a child. But Nick was outraged when he heard about it. "Never, you hear, never suggesting that I break up with you. I love you and I wouldn't trade you for any other woman. If God doesn't give us children, then we'll live together and enjoy each other's company." Evelyn and Nick never returned to the subject again. They seemed resigned to their fate. But when Evelyn heard the question of children from the people around them, from those around her, and she felt uneasy. Vanessa and Serioja had another daughter. They were happily married, but Vanessa had little contact with her mother. Evelyn, having buried Mark, who was stabbed to death by a neighbor in a drunken brawl, was left to live in his house. She asked to go to her youngest daughter's house, but Vanessa didn't want to take her in. I don't think she will be a good example for her granddaughters. The woman explained her decision. I don't want any drunkenness here. Evelyn and her husband came to Maria several times, offering to help, to fix up the house that was almost falling apart. But the mother did not accept any help from her eldest daughter. She abandoned us years ago and went to her Washington, D.C., taking all her money. So go there. She yelled at her. I don't want anything more from you. When I asked you, you didn't want to share. Now get the fuck out of here. Forget you have a mother. You're ungrateful. I raised you alone without a father, and you ruined my family. You kicked my husband out. Vanessa left you. I didn't abandon anyone. Evelyn tried to justify herself. You're the one who threw me out of your life like an unwanted kitten. After Grandma and Grandpa died, I was floundering on my own. Well, you're just going to keep on floundering. Don't mess with me. I have someone to take care of me. Vanessa has always loved me, unlike you. Yeah, that's why you live here in this shack. Out of spite, Evelyn said. It's none of your business. I can live where I want. Get out of my house, shouted after and running daughters Maria. Having become an unhappy witness of the last scandal, Nick forbade Evelyn to go to her mother. And Evelyn herself lost the last desire to visit this woman. 6 months after moving to the country house, 6 months after moving to the country house of his son, Nick's father died. The mother was very worried, but tried to hold on. After consultation, the spouses moved her to their apartment. Cramped, but not in offense, said Nick. Don't join us, said the wife. We have a one-room apartment, but it's big. Well, now that I settled in, as Mom said, why should our apartment be idle? Let's sell it and exchange it for a 2- or 3-room apartment. A year later, the couple celebrated a housewarming party in a spacious 3-room apartment. That day, the house was full of guests, Vanessa and James. With their daughters came to congratulate relatives. Friends brought a lot of gifts. The holiday was a success. Evelyn and her mother-in-law set a sumptuous table, and everyone was satisfied. And in the evening, after seeing his friends off, Nick took his relatives to the country house. They wished to stay with them for a few days. Evelyn and her mother-in-law were clearing the table when she felt very bad. Nick's frightened mother called an ambulance and called her son. By the time he returned, a doctor was already sitting near Evelyn. Seeing Nick, she said hello to him and smiled and said, "Congratulations, colleague, you're about to become a daddy. And you, mommy, do you need to take care of yourself?" She turned to Evelyn. "In the next few months, you should not have any excitement or overexertion."
Subscribe and click the bell.
There was no way they were going to meet. There was no chance. Their lives were like planets orbiting far apart in different orbits. Alex, a law student who had nothing to do at an expensive fashionable resort, was brought here by illness. Last winter he was depressed, and it came out of the blue. Yes, he studied for days and nights, sitting at the textbooks. Yes, he was in practice, where he saw such scum of the earth that God forbid he should meet them on a narrow path. And then one day he ran out of energy all at once. He lay with his back turned to the wall and stupidly looked at the geometric patterns of the carpet. He didn't want to eat, study, or even live. His mother and father were terribly worried. Alex was their only late son, a fictionally gentle, intelligent people. They never pressured the boy. If he was forbidden something, he understood perfectly well why. And all that could be allowed to him, allowed to get a dog, to bring home friends with a sleepover, to go with the class on a camping trip. He never heard from his father and mother no. It was the same with his choice of profession. Alex's mom worked as a people's assessor for a while. They're called nodding fields because they never challenge a judge's opinion or decision. But Mom had a girlhood crush on the judge, an attractive blue-eyed woman of about 45 years old. Mom admired people who, despite a difficult life, retain optimism and a cheerful disposition. Judge Nancy had been divorced a long time ago and was raising a deaf-mute daughter. Her husband left just because of the birth of such a sick daughter. Also, a member of their family was a huge Maine Coon cat. Once there was a newspaper with a program on TV, and the cat took this paper as a special kind of invitation, meaning you can come here. The program was removed a long time ago, but we couldn't eradicate the cat's bad habit. They never turned on the TV. Nancy Helen's daughter lived in a special boarding school. She came home on weekends. Her mother was not going to marry anymore and gave all her strength to her work. In the first place, because she sincerely loved her work, and in the second place, she saved most of her earnings. She wanted to take Lena abroad for treatment. Surgery plus rehabilitation. Every day Nancy had to judge people who stole something or didn't share something or beat up or even killed. Most of all, she did not like the cases concerning the division of property, when people who had previously considered themselves relatives and were going to live together for the whole century began to fight over some closet or gold jewelry, and attacked each other with such fury that the civil case right there in the courtroom and threatened to turn into criminal. One time Alex went to pick up his mom too early. He had to wait for her. A young man named Parker was on trial. He had just been released from the zone and returned to his mistress Betty and was just beginning, so to speak, to taste freedom. In the evening they quarreled and Parker stabbed Betty. The ambulance came. Betty was drunk and didn't want to go to the hospital. They could barely convince her to get stitches. She wanted to stay with her example, who didn't understand why he'd taken up the knife. In the courtroom, they told each other they loved each other. "Betty, I'm sorry, there's no one I care about more. Parker told you. I'm going to sit down again, aren't you? I'll be waiting for you." Betty pressed his hands to his chest. This was a side of life Alex didn't know, had never encountered. Parker got 2 years and 10 months. And Betty was in the hallway excitedly discussing with her sister what to send him in first gear. Nancy felt sorry for him, Mom said as she and Alex drove home. She gave him the shortest sentence possible. He had already been convicted once, but his girlfriend was almost on her knees, assuring him that she held no grudge against him. Alex seemed to be thinking about something of his own. But isn't that when he started reading different literature? Not like before. If before he was interested in adventures, now they were replaced by detectives, books about the elusive, criminals, bloody maniacs, their kidnapper, and domestic violence. In Alex's senior year of high school, he told his parents he wanted to become an investigator. Mom was scared. "It's dangerous. Can't you choose some more peaceful profession?" Dad objected. "Alex is not likely to go into a dangerous line of work. I think he'll work in our small town, and soon all romance will be dispelled. He'll have to investigate a case like the one where a homeless man broke into an apartment and stole a laptop to drink it away. So I'd like to know, wouldn't a chore like this turn him away from the legal profession?" Alex wasn't in the mood to open up. So he briefly said, "We'll just have to wait and see." And during the years of study, he really had to see a lot of things that were too cruel, rough, ruthless. Practice was coming to an end, and again lectures were replaced by seminars. And at home he had to study reports, prepare term papers, and then look at the subject of his diploma. I studied every day until late at night. And finally, from the accumulated fatigue, and there was that very nervous breakdown. He became depressed. Parents were worried God knows where the money came from and bought him a trip to an expensive sanatorium by the sea. Alex didn't even want to go. What difference, where he will lie for hours in a fetal position in a city apartment on the 8th floor or in a local room, 100 meters from the sea. But suddenly the change of place did him good. In the sanatorium, the doctor began to treat him the old-fashioned way. He did not prescribe expensive procedures for the young man. Different spa healing climates, sea bathing, long walks, and drinks with soothing concoctions that were given at the bar had to do the trick. And after a few days, Alex felt that the air here was really healing, and he began to fall asleep easily in the evening. Sleeping soundly at night, he stopped having nightmares, and early in the morning he was greeted by the sea, clear as a tear, which washed away all the negativity and got rid of heavy thoughts for breakfast. Alex came with a wolfish appetite for metal, even milk porridge, which he did not like before. At the table, his neighbors were a father with a small daughter and a middle-aged woman. The little girl had a pretty face. Her hair was twisted into two thick pigtails. She chattered amusingly, and somehow it so happened that if the little girl was given peaches or cakes, everyone at the table was happy to give them to the little girl. Her daddy Benjamin smiled, embarrassed and grateful. The middle-aged woman's name was Helen. She was unusually silent. It was clear that she was a wealthy woman. What was the jewelry alone? In the ring and hid a large diamond earrings with the same gemstones attracted admiring glances. Helen's short-cropped hair was kept small, which she dressed simply, but not a single thing looked cheap. And also the open things that women in the South love so much. Helen wore no loincloths, shorts, short skirts, over t-shirts. She always threw on a long-sleeved shirt or jacket. Helen probably did this then to hide her painful thinness. She seemed not just slim, but truly emaciated. Alex thought she must be on some fancy diet. Sometimes Helen sat down at the table, drank only a glass of tea, and left immediately. Sometimes, without any appetite, she would pick at the second course with a spoon and leave the plate. It was still rare when I managed to meet her gaze. If the neighbors at the table were talking to her, Helen answered, looking somewhere past, and her answers were always complicated and her voice quiet, as if she was afraid to say an extra word. Alex never met her either on the beach or on excursions, and they were organized almost every day in the sanatorium. You could see Helen only on the farthest paths, and that's not immediately noticeable, sitting on a bench somewhere, face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, enjoying the solitude. Alex didn't really care. He was glad that he was starting to come to life himself. There was an interest in life. For the first time in many months, he began to make some plans. Periodically, all vacationers in the sanatorium had to visit the doctor to check how the treatment was going. What was the result? Alex waited for his turn. Sitting in the corridor at the doctor was Helen. The door was slightly open, and Alex heard her voice, characteristic, slightly stated, "To great regret, we were not able to help you. Isn't that right?" Sebastian asked the woman softly. "Well, probably, if I hadn't come to you, I would have been worse off." Helen tried to answer delicately. "You haven't put on weight." "Not a bit." "Blood pressure still spiking," Sebastian listed. "And the psychologist says your anxiety level hasn't gotten any lower." "That's right." Silence. Alex imagined Helen nodded. "That's right," Sebastian summarized. "Until it's removed. The root cause you won't recover. I would recommend that you see a psychiatrist when you arrive. Apparently chemistry should already be involved here. Have him find some medication." No, Alex has never heard Helen speak so loudly and with so much excitement. "It's impossible for me." Even then, I proved with great difficulty that I'm not mentally ill. That's the only reason he got jail time. After all, he presented the case so that I made up everything with an unstable person psycho and make hysterics. Jealous of everything and everyone. Plus a vivid imagination. And it's a done deal. But you didn't do the beating yourself. Sebastian was still talking softly. "It's still a basic fact. Didn't I tell you?" He somehow convinced my friends, ex-girlfriends, to testify that I've been weird since I was young, that I can cut myself and stuff like that. Okay, apparently the doctor preferred not to go into all that. There was silence. Sebastian must have been writing. "Get it at the nearest drugstore. These are sleeping pills. They're a prescription drug. And for the last few days you'll be here, get some sleep, and don't think about anything. I strongly advise you to go home. Let not psychiatrist, let psychotherapist, let psychotherapist. No one will put you on the register. But as you do not realize, you will not be able to live fully, will not be able to enjoy life, if you do not work on this problem. How much life is left in there, doctor?" Helen abruptly pushed back her chair. A couple of moments later, the door opened, and without looking at Alex, the woman walked quickly down the corridor. For some reason, all day long the young man couldn't forget about this conversation. He waited for dinner to see Helen in the dining room. Usually she was always a little late. They served very pretty cakes for dessert, baskets with cream and fruit. Alex automatically handed his to Ninotchka, while he looked out the door every now and then. But Helen never appeared. The next day Alex, as usual, went to the beach. Early in the morning he liked those hours, when there was still no one here. But who among the vacationers would really think of getting up at 5? Only a few fishermen could be found on the shore. But suddenly he saw Helen. The woman was sitting on a chaise lounge under the awning, although the sun had just descended. But one could see Helen. But you could see Helen, and here wanted to remain as inconspicuous as possible. She was wearing a denim fiber skirt, long to her heels, and some kind of stretchy sweater that Helen was tangled in. She sat with her arms around her knees and stared in front of her. Alex didn't want to disturb her and was about to discreetly retreat, but then she looked at him. They nodded to each other. "Good morning, can't sleep," he said. Because he had to say something. "As it turns out, even the pills don't work for me." Helen grinned. Alex didn't expect her to answer. She hadn't told anything about herself until now. "And I was tired of studying," he said. "Have a seat on the next slogan. Once I decided to give myself a break. That made it easier. Maybe you should also not think about unpleasant things." As Helen looked him straight in the eyes. "Can you do that? Teach me. How do I do that?" Suddenly tears came to her eyes. Helen bit her lip and stared at the sea. He could think of nothing but the trivial. But there are no unsolvable problems in the world. "Only if someone died, I died," Helen said. Isn't it obvious? Helen grew up with a stepmother, and once wanted more than anything to have her own home and her own family. Though everyone around her admired her father, her stepmother, and all 3 of Helen's children, and her 2 free, younger brothers. Her father was a scientist, a university lecturer, soft in family life, and a professor who was passionate about science to the point of madness. He forgot about food and sleep. If it was about his favorite science, his first wife died a few days after the birth of Helen. On the face of it was not so rare reason. A medical oversight. Later, someone changed all the records. I didn't punish anyone for that story. No one was suspended. And the grief-stricken professor never tried to get justice. Perhaps he wanted to raise his daughter on his own and never marry again. But after a few years, he met a young woman, whom he sincerely admired, as he did. Maria was in love with science, which means that she lived a spiritual life in words, and everything material was of secondary importance to her. The professor very quickly proposed to her, and Maria was not afraid to marry a man with a child. 2 years later, she gave birth to twins and decided that she had had enough of children, although the professor had hired her an assistant from the beginning. Still, the small children demanded too much attention. The housekeeper took over the household, cooking, washing, cleaning. But her mother didn't trust her to raise the boys. Maria wanted to raise her sons in her own image. Spiritual came first. One couldn't put too much value on things. Not even the fact that the couple's child saw toys as living things. No discount was made. A few times a year, the mother would pack plush animals, cars, and the like into a large cardboard box and give it to a woman she knew. A poor woman with many children. And God forbid that the boys would regret something, of course. In exchange for the given toys were bought new dressed boys were also not worse than their peers. But since they were little, they knew not to dream about things. Fashionable backpack or in one ship, which itself will swim in the bathtub, grinds the water with a propeller. But about this or that book, or that recovered father, who had a heart condition, you can dream quite well. With the boys, this issue passed. They obeyed their mother, at least for the time being. But Maria, from the very beginning, tried to apply this method of upbringing and stepdaughter. However, she was disappointed. Helen did not accept the punishments. She cried. One time, she even had a nervous attack. Her father promised Helen for her birthday the same lush princess dress that the girl's friends had. Most likely, the professor didn't understand what it was all about at all. But he had the pleasure of going with Helen to the store and pleasing her with a grade. Helen was so excited about the gift, made on the eve of her birthday, that she put on the dress, not wanting to take it off. When she was nevertheless persuaded to change into a nightgown before going to bed, her stepmother took the dress and hung it up in the closet in the room, saying she would allow the outfit to be worn on holidays. Helen, from whose hands the coveted article had been snatched, burst into tears so that her hands began to tremble, and the next day she had a fever, And instead of a holiday with a cake and candles and balloons instead of fun with her friends, Helen lay in bed in semi-oblivion. Then the father and stepmother had a long talk behind closed doors, and the stepmother backed off from raising her stepdaughter. She forbade Helen practically nothing else. The girl simply ceased to exist for her. If Helen addressed her with any question, Maria answered to ask her father. The professor was so busy, so far from real life, that very soon the girl had to become independent. Sometimes she asked her father about her own mother. Tears invariably came to the professor's eyes. Katya was so sweet, cheerful, with an easy character, that with her death, all joy left the house. Apparently, Helen had taken after her mother in many ways. She tried to arrange for two factions to form in the house. After all, Maria has sons. The girl reasoned, so let her be with Benjamin and Tony, the three of them, and they will not be bored. And Daddy's mine. Otherwise, it's not fair. They're together, and I'm alone. But the stepmother was quick to put an end to her daughter's claim to her father's attention. She believed that no one can be closer to her husband than herself. They work together, they have common interests. And Helen is growing up. And soon she will have her own life and her own spouse. Thus, the girl's relatives were replaced by her friends. She often stayed with them for days at a time. Her friends' parents didn't mind. No matter what, Helen was well, raised in a friendly manner, always tried to help with the housework. Sometimes someone would say, "I wish I had a daughter like that." Helen would only flinch. Apparently, deep down, it was weighing on her. The fact that, unlike her peers, she did not have a normal family, and she really wanted to have one. No one came to Helen's graduation. The professor was very busy. There was some important meeting of the scientific department. He asked his wife to go to the school, but at least for the solemn part of the awarding of certificates. But Maria made a distant sign. "I haven't been involved in Helen's education for a long time. I don't want to be a hypocrite, participating in this celebration." The professor only shrugged his shoulders and smiled guiltily at his daughter. "I apologized for the way things turned out." However, Helen was already hardened by life, and she only grinned. She did not expect anything else. However, the behavior of her father she still assessed as a betrayal and chose a university for herself in another city. Her father rented her an apartment. Here you have to give justice. The stepmother never interfered if the father spent money on his daughter. "I know for myself in the hostel, and it is difficult to study well," said the professor. "There you stay up late, you bring friends. And if you are going to study seriously, you need a quiet and working environment." He went with his daughter, visited her new apartment, gave a generous sum of money for Helen to buy everything she needed. But when the girl became a student, her behavior changed. It's as if she got to all sorts of entertainment. Now she often lingered in nightclubs, carefree fun with new friends. They could drink so much that they could hardly tell the cab driver their home address. And boys for the evening to pick up and afford any other craziness. And Helen dressed in ways she never would have thought possible. She used to wear bright, flashy things. She used to leave her hair loose. She was naturally very good-looking, and she was never without male attention. Another thing is that now she remained as kind and trusting as she had always been. She was introduced to Leo by a classmate. Julia had a boyfriend, and he had a friend. Why not sit together with the same company? They were already settled at a table in a cafe. The friend's boyfriend was running late. But when he showed up, Julia's face stretched. She must have thought she blundered. Finished with the wrong guy. Suddenly he looked like he'd stepped out of the pages of a men's fashion magazine. No, in this case it didn't matter what he was wearing, but that hard face. The sneer. Such bright eyes and black eyebrows in the span of a young girl is covered with pictures of such a Superman. His bedroom. It was strange that Leo still didn't have a girlfriend. He willingly took on the role of Helen's beau. For the rest of the evening, he took care of her, pouring her wine, laughing at her jokes. And when the party was over, he walked her home. Perhaps it could have been limited to a few kisses goodbye. But Helen saw no reason why not. Why shouldn't they end a wonderful evening? On an equally marvelous night, she took her new pal by the hand and carried him back to her house. And indeed, the night was so intoxicating that in the morning both didn't want to part. That was where it all began. The romance spun up most impetuously, and 2 weeks did not pass. Leo confessed his love to Helen and asked her to marry him. She was amazed at such a hasty decision, especially since, having looked at her family, she did not want to get a stamp in her passport as soon as possible. Girlfriends met the news differently. Someone who enthusiastically forbade and began to ask for a wedding, preferably as a witness. Someone who has already seen the handsome Leo and frankly invited. And Sophia's closest friend only shook her head. Sophia was not a prude at all. She was happy to open up at the same parties that Helen was happy to pick up guys for one night. So Helen was all the more surprised. "What do you like?" she asked. "I'm not getting married yet, but you should have seen how beautifully he proposed to me. All honorable." On her knees, with a bouquet of flowers and a stunning gilt diamond ring, Helen showed her hand with a dainty ring. "I said I would think about it." With poorly concealed pride, she said, "And at any rate, as long as I wear the ring, I will be faithful to it." And what did he interrogate Sophia about? It seemed to me that he was very upset that I had not consented. Helen confessed at once. I think he imagined that I would turn, throw myself on his neck, and confess my eternal love in return. Sophia shook her head again. "I haven't had any experience of my own family life, of course," she said. "But I don't often see guys of that age getting married so quickly. So far, I've only seen a few cases of young men proposing marriage so quickly. And you know who they were talking about? Alcohol. And both of them were already incorrigible. Or, as they say, incurable. And they'd already tried marriage, but their wives couldn't take it for long." "You mean he drinks?" Helen laughed. "I'm gonna disappoint you, but I'm a leader in this business. You know I sometimes can't resist an extra cocktail, and he doesn't even guzzle. He's driving. What do you know about him?" Sophia kept up. "Well, his father left the family early. His mother raised him, but she was difficult. She drove men around and paid little attention to her son. Maybe that's what we have in common. Neither he nor I had a normal family. Maybe," Sophia agreed thoughtfully. "But if I were to advise you to look for a husband, it would be among those guys who had a normal, good family, where the father was used to taking care of the mother, whose son saw that." And I lazily pitied with unexpected seriousness, said Helen. "He, like me, wanted warmth at home, and his mother gave all her warmth to strange men. He hoped that she would at least give birth to another child, and he would have a brother or sister to take care of. But no. He grew up a lonely orphan with a living mother. But you're not going to run off and marry him right now, are you?" "No, of course not." Helen sounded concerned. "I've already messed up my studies with these affairs. I have debts for the last session. There's no way I can retake it, and I have to do it. It would be a big blow to my father if I suddenly dropped out of the institute. He's the one who pays my rent and gives me money to live on." "Yes," Sophia agreed. "So far you've had it easy. But if you lose your allowance, you'll have to work part-time like many other students." Unfortunately, things took a turn for the worst for Helen, when she once again came to retake the course. The teacher, who already disliked her, tried to do everything to stump the girl. He asked unexpected questions, demanded knowledge of additional material. Helen had spent several sleepless nights preparing for the exam, and now she had everything mixed up in her head. She ended up getting another D. In the study section, she was told that, in general, if she did not want to be expelled, she had two options: or take a leave of absence for whatever reason or switch to a paid department. The girl was not satisfied with both options, but the second was worse than the first. Studying was expensive. She could not take this load on her father. It remained to take an academic classmate, whose mother was a gynecologist, asked her to make a fake pregnancy certificate. Helen was given a sabbatical leave. The girl decided to get a job in a cafe, save up some money. And if she couldn't recover next year, she'd pay for her own tuition. But Leo, when he found out what had happened, insisted on marriage with redoubled force. "You won't be dependent on your father," he urged. "I earn enough, if you want to. You'll study further. Do you want to?" "No. Don't you like the prospect of being your own boss?" Helen resisted for a while. She did get a job as a waitress in a small restaurant, but she didn't last long. First, she was snapped at by a customer who thought Helen was too clumsy and sloppy. Then her companions accused her of cheating on her tips. In this restaurant, it was customary to deposit tips in a common pot, and then to distribute them. And most of it went to those who had worked here for a long time. The newcomers, on the other hand, got the crumbs. This unwritten rule seemed so unfair to Helen that she actually arranged for some of the money that visitors gave her. In short, the girl was out on the street. And that's when she went to the registry office with Leo. They took the application, and the glowing groom asked her what kind of wedding she wanted. Something modest? Helen asked, "You don't have to spend a lot of money on all this tinsel. I'm fine if we get a table somewhere." "Oh, that's fine." Leo seems to be okay with that. "I wouldn't want to be the lead in a play where everyone's staring at you." Helen laughed at you. "You're the one who's handsome like a movie star." "Not me. I'll be invited. By the way, I haven't been to your house yet. You haven't met my family. My relatives live on the other side of the country and are unlikely to come to the wedding. I'd love to show you the house next weekend. Only now it seems too small. I never thought about it before. But now that I've met you, I want a big, very big family." Helen only laughed. No, she didn't mind children. But first, he'd have to get his degree. The day before the wedding, he gave her a present. They were to go on a wedding trip, but it was supposed to be special, just like he was special. He rented a cottage by a lake in one of the northern regions, but you probably can't swim there. "Yes?" Helen mumbled confusedly. She had assumed that they would go somewhere after the wedding. But she imagined that it would be the south, maybe Turkey or one of the European countries. Even the Krasnodar region. Sea, sun, fruit. A room in a nice hotel. They would get up at dawn and walk along the beach, holding hands. But Leo even grumbled. "You can't find privacy there in season with so many people. The beaches are jammed with excursion crowds, and I want you and me to be alone." And after a few days, Helen was convinced that her husband was right. Instead, he chose a wonderful retreat and a cottage in the woods, surrounded by huge, picturesque fir trees. How wonderful the pine needles smelled. It took a few minutes to walk along the wooden planking to the lake and sit on the bridges and admire the view. The water in the lake was the clearest and not so cold. They enjoyed swimming several times a day. The cottage was small, but Helen fell in love with it. 2 bedrooms, the second one was obviously unnecessary. A cozy kitchen finished in wood and a living room with a window and a fireplace. The ceiling-high refrigerator was filled with groceries and newlyweds. There was no need to drive to the nearest town, although it was a quarter of an hour at most by car. Helen had never had such a good time. They would actually get up at dawn, have coffee on the terrace, and then the whole day belonged to them. One could walk along forest paths, discovering new picturesque corners. You can splash as much as you like in the clear, clean water. On rainy days, one could read by the fireplace, listening to the sound of the rain. And that night they spent under the open sky, sheltered by a single plate, with the same old starry river flowing over their heads. Helen had forgotten to bring her birth control pills. Going through the small medicine cabinet, she discovered they were gone, although she thought she had put them in with her medication. At first, she was saddened by this, but then she waved goodbye. And she felt so good next to Leo that she thought, as it will be, so it will be. She was sure her husband would solve any problem with him. She would not have to think about her daily bread, or about the fact that the child lacked something. In this corner of paradise, Helen felt as if she had rested for all the past years. She felt truly loved and desired. So she didn't want to go back to normal life. But Leo had promised her another surprise, and he was not wrong in promising that his house would make her admire him. She hadn't expected her husband to be such a wealthy man. It was a beautiful mansion on the outskirts of town. It wasn't exactly a high-profile place. It's not the waterfront, but it's near the woods. You could look at it and reminisce about your wedding trip. High, low fence, automatic opening doors. "I'll be safe for you here," Leo said. "No one's gonna steal you away from me. Who needs me?" Helen started to pay and went to look at her new possessions. The house was not that big. A kitchen on the first floor and a living room on the first floor. 3 rooms, bedroom, study. And the third one Leo said would be a nursery. Last of all, he showed her the basement. Most of it was set up as a gymnasium. There was also a small room. According to Leo, Helen's eyes shone for storage of all kinds of junk. She mentally envisioned making this the most beautiful house in the world. She didn't know exactly how much Leo earned, but she was sure that she would have enough for various transformations. And she'd be working soon, too. "Don't you have some blag to find me a place?" she asked at dinner. Helen always tried to turn dinner into a little celebration. Not only cooked something tasty, but also beautifully set. Our table. She'd set glasses, pour wine and talk. Under such a feast was usually the most pleasant. But now Leo looked up at her in surprise. "Why do you have to work?" Helen was confused. "I always thought that I should not sit on my neck." "You're not sitting on my neck." "I always thought I'd patronize and pamper my wife. She wouldn't have to work for someone else's uncle and put up with his whims." Helen was very pleased to hear this, and the conversation ended there. A week later, however, the young woman returned to him. Now Leo went to work every morning, and Helen spent the whole day alone. In addition, her husband always returned at different times. "You can't guess what time to make dinner so that everything is hot." "I'm thinking of getting a job," she said. She poured her husband coffee again and added, "Well, I'm here all day by myself. You're not going to watch TV or read all day long, are you? I should at least get my license. I could go to a friend's house or shopping. And if you were babysitting, you'd be bored too." Leo looked at her carefully. "But that's another matter." Helen even laughed. "My familiar girls say that the first time after childbirth, and so you go like a zombie with one single dream to sleep. So why should you get a job now and then go straight to maternity leave?" Leo asked. "But I still want to finish the institute first. You can't even imagine. What a disappointment it will be for Dad if I don't have a diploma." Helen protested. "Dad lives only for his science." Leo shrugged, and a few days later Helen took a test and found out she was pregnant. Leo organized a real celebration. Helen wanted to invite Sophia, her closest friend, but he objected. "This is the most important moment in our family's life. We don't need outsiders." But there were flowers and very expensive champagne and ice cream. Helen's favorite sweet, which she preferred to cakes and pastries. Leo immediately said that she would be observed and give birth in a private clinic. No flow doctor who will behave from the beginning and up to the delivery. The most attentive attitude separate room. Of course, Helen could not help but be grateful to her husband for such care. But privacy has already begun. A little burdensome for her. However, the doctor who brought her, Leo sent Helen to all sorts of examinations, and the results were not too pleased. "And you look healthier and stronger than you really are. But things aren't going so well. Something's threatening the baby. Is Helen scared?" "Not if you follow all the recommendations. The doctor said to stick to bed rest. At any moment, you could become dizzy, uncoordinated. You should be able to sit or lie down." "I see." Leo, who was present during the examination, asked his wife affectionately, "So you can't leave the house, dear? And just in case you don't run away, I'll take away your keys." He turned the matter into a joke. But soon Helen actually discovered that a set of keys was missing from her purse. "It's not funny," she said. "You're missing your husband for a long time. I might need something. It's not like I'm going to turn into a forge with no freedom. When the baby comes, everything will change." He promised her, and Helen had to accept it. Leo locked the gate securely when he left in the mornings. So Helen really felt like a prisoner trapped within four walls. "But at least I can have visitors." She couldn't stand it. Leo raised his eyebrows. "Who do you want to see?" "At least Sophia. It's been forever since we've met." He thought for a few moments. "Okay, invite her over for the weekend when I'm home too." Sunday night went wonderfully. Sophia had brought good wine and some toys for the baby to grow up with, she joked. The couple gave her a tour of the house, and then all sat together on the rug in the living room, lapping light sweet wine and talking. The terms of the news had piled up. Helen, too, wanted to talk about her life, to complain about how much she missed her. But Leo was sitting next to her. It was kind of uncomfortable in front of him. If he'd gone somewhere, well, even for a quarter of an hour, but he wouldn't leave his girlfriends. True, he behaved with extraordinary gallantry and tried to charm Sophia. The only moment they had alone together was when Sophia asked to go to the bathroom. "I'll show you the bathroom." Helen jumped up. "How do you live?" Sophia asked. As she slept, nodded her hands. Even if Leo stood under the door from behind the noise of the water, he heard nothing. Everything is normal. Well, yeah, pretty much. Helen really wanted to tell her how much she longed, but she was afraid Sophia wouldn't understand. After all, the way she was living now was dictated by Leo's care for her. "I thought you were locked up like a bird in a cage." "No," Sophia asked obliquely. "He's a good macho guy, but if you decide to run away from him, I understand. And by the way, if you want, you can stay at my place." Sophia had a small apartment, a studio, where she had lovingly designed every corner. There was room for bookshelves, a good record player, and even a small bar. And the loggia Sophia spotted and arranged there a working office, combined with a greenhouse. But only a baby crib will not fit there. And yet Helen had tears in her eyes. Sophia, it turns out, understood her. "Thank you," she whispered. That same evening, when she went to bed, Helen asked her husband, "Can Sophia come to visit us more often? I have more fun with her. I won't have to ask to go anywhere." If she was hoping to take her husband away, she was wrong. "Your girlfriend will not come to our house again," Leo said. "Why not?" Helen was stunned. "You should have thought of bringing wine to a pregnant woman." "I hardly ever drink." Helen justified herself. "You don't need a glass, but I wouldn't let you have more. If she shows up next time without me, how do I know what she's carrying? Maybe a bottle of whiskey. I assure you she wouldn't think twice. And I say what would. You're a kind soul. You don't know how jealous people can be. If something happened to your baby, your Sophia will comfort you. And in your heart you'll be glad it happened. You don't think she's jealous of you now. That you have a husband, a nice house, that you're pregnant, and that she has a job and a room the size of a dog kennel. I bet she drinks a lot and is willing to sleep with anyone she meets." Helen was hit by a wave of icy indignation. "You don't know her at all," she said coldly. "You haven't told me anything about your family. When I asked about it, you gave me complicated answers. But I can tell you about my family. I had no mother. I grew up with a stepmother. I never had a sister. Well, Sophia is the sister I've been missing my whole life. And she successfully dragged you to all sorts of companies, all sorts of bad places. What kind of hot spots? I'm imagining things. If we went to coffee shops or nightclubs, then I'm in the clear. You do realize what kind of people go there, right? Men come to eat girls like this." "I'm a girl," Helen said. "I didn't say that, but with that dog you could act like a girl. Look, I'm not asking you where exactly you work or who you're around. You know I run a security firm. And it's all men. So maybe you're hooking up with them." Romans asked Helen in anger. He slapped her on the cheek. No one had ever hit her before. And to raise a hand on a pregnant woman. Helen recoiled and cried. "There is no greater insult to a man than what you just said to me." Leo walked out, slamming the door. Helen cried for a long time. But the room was so quiet, not a single sound coming from the room, and she gradually began to calm down. The very surroundings had a calming effect on her. It was so beautiful in her room. Everything in soft pink colors. In the end, she came to realize that it was largely her own fault. Men have certain red lines they can't cross. And she had apparently violated the unspoken prohibition. Still, Helen thought that her husband would apologize to her, and she would try to forget the horrible scene. She and her husband spent the night apart. Helen fell into an unexpectedly deep sleep after many tears. She woke up several times, and each time she checked to see if Leo was there. It seemed to her that he must be there. After all, loving people always understand if they have hurt someone else and try to earn forgiveness, even if they are not guilty. But Leo did not come. In the morning, Helen heard that her husband was going to work. She couldn't believe that he was going for nothing. Besides, she wanted to eat too. So she casually walked into the kitchen where he was finishing breakfast, poured herself a cup of coffee, and made a sandwich. "What should I buy today?" Leo asked, as if nothing was wrong. "Will you write a list?" She usually gave him a shopping list with her, except for the very first few days when she was nauseous. So it lay in a thumb drive. But now Helen opened her eyes in surprise. It was as if Leo had forgotten everything that had happened yesterday. "You hit me," she said. And I was surprised at him. It just couldn't have happened. "You had a bad dream." "Do you remember anything?" "No," I shook my head. "But if I upset you, I'm sorry. So what should I buy today?" Helen made a short list of groceries. When her husband left, she wanted to lounge on the couch with her phone, as usual. She was used to reading books from digital libraries lately, but she couldn't find her cell phone. In vain. She looked for it all over the room, checked the bathroom, looked in every nook and cranny in the living room and kitchen. There was no cell phone. She remembered that there was a landline in the house and decided to call her own cell phone from it. Then she would hear a familiar tune and find the missing cell phone. But it turned out that the landline phone was disconnected. That day, Helen was unusually bored. She didn't know what to do until her husband arrived. She had long since weaned herself off the television. Walking was only possible in the small garden. You can't go beyond the fence. The gate is locked. Shit, she can't even contact Sophia. If the cell phone is somehow lost, Sophia could buy a new one, and she would give her friend the money later. When Leo arrived in the evening, the first thing Helen asked him was if he knew where the phone was. Though in her heart she was sure he would answer no. All the more startled by his words. "You don't want the phone." "How's that?" She sat like that. "You'll be calling your friends, talking about your life to me. And I don't want anyone dragging my name around. Especially not dirty girls like Sophia. And you say you don't remember the scene last night." Helen summarized bitterly. "I'm afraid it will be exactly the same today. I don't know what you mean, but all that cell phone service and radiation. I don't think it's good for the baby." Helen laughed, but it sounded almost hysterical. "Look, this isn't the Stone Age, and everyone has a cell phone. I don't part with mine." And I know his voice was calm, like he was talking to a baby, but it's not good for you. Look at you now, your nerves are shot. And I need to keep you safe from any anxiety. Give me the phone, and I'll calm down. I brought you something else." Leo went out and came back with a small flat box. "You say you mostly read books on the internet? I bought you an ebook, and at my request, they put 100 detectives and love stories in it. When you read it, everyone tells me I'll announce your library, but that's not what this is. Do you have a TV for the news? What else do you need? I need to be able to contact someone. You're out all day. What if something happens to me? Get sick? I'd have to call an ambulance to get you out of work. Now I won't leave you so long." Leo said affectionately, "I'll stop by in the middle of the day to see if you're all right." And he did visit her once or twice a day. He always came at different times, and he didn't stay long, sometimes only for a few minutes, to make sure everything was all right. Helen panted, wandering around the rooms. An e-book couldn't replace the internet for her. She realized that she had complained about loneliness for nothing before. She could sit on forums, chat in chat rooms. She could contact the same Sophia through social networks. Now she was deprived of all that. The books her husband had downloaded for her were cheap reading and couldn't occupy her thoughts. Does he really care about me that much? She asked herself, but it's really choking me. Hormones were probably affecting her too, because she didn't recognize herself. Every now and then she started crying like a hurt child and felt very unhappy. A few days later, Helen told her husband, "I can't go on like this. I'm leaving you." He was just finishing his lunch and gave a marvelous green pea. Leo raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Where are you going to go? Shouldn't you care?" She answered defiantly. "I understand," he said calmly. Now he spoke with more than just that tone. "You wanted to live with your Sophia until the divorce was finalized, and then have a baby, get a job, and get child support. I painted the right picture. So what? 1,000 women live like that?" Helen twitchy chin. "But you're not gonna live like that. First of all, you're not going anywhere because you're carrying my baby, and I'm not going to give you the opportunity to steal it from me. I'm not going to steal." Helen realized for the first time that her husband might not just let her go. Just like that. "Will you be able to see him?" He shook his head. I don't like it. But don't you realize what's made me unhappy? You're not yourself right now. Leo took his time and poured coffee for both of them. Then when the baby comes, you'll think you're crazy for a while. It's okay, it'll get better. You'll see that you can't stop me from leaving. You're a free man, but so am I. Are you sick now? Leo tried to stroke his wife's arm, but she pulled her back. The sick are taken care of without asking for their consent. I will leave, Helen said not so confidently. No, you won't. But if you want to, you can try. When did Leo leave? Helen walked around the castle one more time and realized that her husband was right. Maybe a man trained and physically strong would be able to get out of here. But not a pregnant woman whose eyes darken every now and then and for whom physical effort is contraindicated. The wall is high and topped with metal peaks. She has no phone now. The gate is on an automatic lock. The house is set back from the other buildings, and there's no way that if she screams, anyone will hear her. And besides, it would be a lot easier for Leo to make her look crazy. Helen remembered an acquaintance who had an elderly mother. Emily would go to work in the mornings, and the old lady would open the window and scream that she was being murdered. Called her daughter for help. Her greatest fear was that her mother would fall out. So she finally put bars on the windows. The mother was sedated, but nothing worked. Her screams echoed down the street. Another thing, the neighbors were aware of what was going on and did not rush old ladies to help. Nevertheless, Helen tried to climb up to the attic. The roof of the house was flat, and part of it was a kind of observation platform. But Leo had made provision for that. The entrance to the attic was locked. The young woman cried once again. In her heart, she hoped that she would somehow find a way to escape and would be among her own people today. But it turned out that escape would have to be postponed until later. As a last resort, she would run away from the maternity hospital. Better yet, she'll tell everyone around her. The doctor, the nurses, the women in labor. That Leo turned the house into a prison. He's kept her imprisoned her entire pregnancy, and now needed to help her sneak out of the maternity ward with the baby. Helen didn't much care where she went. She could stay at Sophia's for a while. Cramped, but not too cramped. Then maybe she could find some work so that she could afford a nanny for the baby. At the very least, she'll move in with her father. He wouldn't kick her out of the house. Thoughts of her father brought her back to the institute, which Helen had forgotten all about. Her father still thinks she's studying, doesn't he? He sends her money for the apartment, and it is saved on her card. But Leo has the card too, as well as all family documents, passports, policies. He hid them all in the home safe under the pretext that Helen's absent-mindedness is not worth losing documents at the most inopportune moment. When we get to the maternity hospital, we'll find out that you left everything at home and can't remember where your passport is. That's when Leo was telling her all this. His words had sounded like a joke, but now Helen realized that she was the door behind which she was, figuratively speaking, locked. Another shift appeared. It would be okay if she could get away. Sophia will give her money for a cab, and her father won't ask for his own daughter's papers. If Leo won't give her passport back, Helen will recover it later. She'll say she lost it. In the meantime, maybe try another way to give up food. If she goes on a hunger strike, Leo will have to do what she wants. After all, he's so looking forward to this baby. He will not allow Helen to starve. It could be bad for the baby. And on this day, she didn't make dinner. When her husband returned, Helen sat in her room on the wide windowsill and looked out of the window. It was raining. There was a fence and wet lilac bushes in front of her eyes. She knew her husband was about to make sure there was nothing to eat if he made a scandal. Well, Helen was ready for that. Instead, Leo was rattling around in the kitchen. Half an hour later, he walked in on her. "Let's go to dinner. Everything's on the table." "I'm not hungry," Helen said without turning from the window. "You don't feel well." He became alarmed. "Can you take it that way? There's hot soup and rolls waiting for you. Coffee, of course." Helen was very hungry, but she was sure she could stand it, and only shook her head negatively, saying, "I won't go." "If you don't break the regimen," Leo kept talking to her like a child, "we'll go out this weekend. We'll walk in the park, have ice cream. You've really been away from home, haven't you?" Helen couldn't believe her ears. Leo couldn't realize that when she was outside the gate, she would leave him immediately. She'd jump out of the car. For that matter. Yeah, he nodded. I'm not kidding. Well said, Helen. I'll be right down. She cleaned herself up a bit, washed her face, and changed her pajamas for a robe. She didn't like to walk around, unraveled. But until this minute, her mood had been so bad that she didn't feel like doing anything. Now it was different. So pull yourself together, her husband said to her at dinner. If you don't feel well, of course we won't go anywhere. But if everything will be normal, then I intend to treat you a little. Shall we go to the store and get you something? You'll soon be able to wear the clothes you're used to. It was Monday, and all week Helen had behaved exemplarily. Now she had no doubt that she would be free before the deadline. She did the usual household chores, and at the same time her head was full of thoughts. If Sophia had guessed and come to her house when her husband was away, they could have talked over the fence. Maybe somehow a friend could give her the phone. But in any case, Sophia wouldn't refuse to take her in. Helen had no doubt about that. On Saturday morning, Helen looked at her husband, as if asking what their plans were for the day. Unfortunately, I'm being called into work today, Leo said. Getting my second cup of coffee. Do you remember what you promised me? The young woman couldn't stand it. What did he pretend not to remember? But then he laughed. Of course, I know how much you're looking forward to it. Let's go tomorrow right from the morning. It was rainy on Sunday, but Leo was not going to cancel the trip. First, he brought Helen to the country square. The rain had already stopped freezing, but there was not a single person in the alleys. The young woman was very disappointed at the circumstance. If she just tried to run away from Leo here, he would catch up with her in a few seconds, and there was no one to turn to for help. At this time, the husband received a phone call. There is a slight change of plans, he told Helen. I have to be in the office now, but it dragged on interminably. You can go shopping by yourself. I'll give you the card, if you don't mind. Helen could only nod. I'll give you 2 hours. I'll call a cab, then I'll wait for you at home. Leo sat his wife down himself, pulled up his car, and gave the address Center City, the very street that was considered the center of big and small stores. Helen watched in the small mirror as her husband's figure moved away. Change of plans, she told the cab driver. As soon as the car rounded the corner, I'll stop by a friend's house first. If only she had ended up at Sophia's, she would have nothing more to fear. Helen didn't regret not bringing her things with her. Didn't care. She would get a job and be able to provide herself and the baby with the essentials. The main thing was to get out of this captivity. The cab driver shrugged his shoulders, saying he didn't care where he was taking her. And after a quarter of an hour, he stopped the car near the house where Sophia lived. Helen awkwardly got out of the cab. She had lost the gracefulness of her movements since the onset of her pregnancy. She still had to climb to the 3rd floor, and her heart was racing like a hare's. There was a slight odor of Wendy's in the stairwell, and Helen was overcome with nostalgia. It had always smelled like this in here. Sophia's neighbor old lady, Wendy, had a great deal of respect for it and put it generously in all the closets and commands. Helen pressed the bell button, imagining that in a few seconds her friend would open the door for her, and they would throw themselves around each other's necks. But no one rushed to open it. In vain, Helen called again and again with a falling heart. The young woman realized that her friend was not at home. She must have gone to the store somewhere, but she would wait for Sophia. There was no other way out. Helen lost the bag and sank down on the steps. When she heard the front door open, she was alarmed. It could have been Sophia. A few moments later, she couldn't believe her eyes. Leah was coming up the stairs. How did you find me? She asked, barely audibly. Honey, it was a test, and you didn't pass it. I had no doubt you would escape, though. And of course, I had no trouble guessing where. There's nowhere else to go. If you were smart, you'd get in a cab and go to your father's. But you're a poor, naive fool. Don't call Sophia. She's on vacation in the South, and I'm sure she's perfectly happy and doesn't think about you. And you knew she was away. Helen asked with just her lips. Of course I knew. Otherwise, I wouldn't have offered you that walk. What kind of a bitch are you? Now let's go home, calmly, Leo continued. Not long before, Helen was contemplating when she would go into labor, whether it would be possible to keep from screaming, to shout in front of everyone. It seemed very embarrassing to her, but now she was exactly screaming help. Leo squeezed her hand tightly. "You want me to call the psychiatric team?" "I have a friend who works there. He's aware of the problem and will come faster than the police. If you expect her to be called by the neighbors, a psychiatrist will tell the cops you have a diagnosis, and a caring husband will drive you. So I suggest you don't embarrass yourself and make yourself look crazy in front of a lot of other people." With her head down, Helen followed her husband. The tide of emotions was too strong. She felt sick, barely able to stand on her feet. Leo's car was parked in the driveway. He looked at his wife into the back seat like a thing in a mirror. Helen saw his grin. She closed her eyes and didn't open them the whole way. She really felt no longer a human being as a person as before, but an object, belonging to a master. Helen had become depressed. Not only did she not do household chores, but she would not leave her room, lying all day long, turning her back to the wall and keeping silent when she had to get up to go to the restroom. She felt herself weakening quickly, and it was a pleasant sensation. Helen wanted to sink into oblivion as soon as possible and leave this world that way. And the last thing she wanted was for Leo to disturb her and talk to her. The day came when he came and put a chair next to her bed and sat down. "It won't go on like this," he said. "If you don't eat, you won't last long." Helen twitched and, without turning around, made it clear that she didn't care. "Now you're definitely mentally ill." Leo continued, "And if you don't do something about it, you're not going to get better." "Let me go," Helen said. "Come with me." She got out of bed, listless, like a marionette. She no longer believed her husband. Leo held her hand tightly as they went down the stairs and then down another one to the basement. Helen wondered if she had the strength to make it upstairs. After all, and this was indifferent to her, what did it matter where she lay? Might as well be on the floor in the hall. In the basement, Leo opened the very door that was usually closed, for which his old things were kept, as he had said. Now Helen saw that the room was completely empty. A cage. Now her husband held Helen by both hands and spoke to her like a child. "If you behave as you do now, I won't be able to leave you alone. You understand? In your condition, you could hurt yourself. There's plenty of opportunity for that up there in the house. And I can't let anything happen to you and the baby. You keep going. You'll be seen by a psychiatrist friend of mine, prescribed pills, and you'll live here with all the furniture. Mattress, night potty is fine. You had this torture chamber specially set up?" she asked. "No," I shrugged. "It's not uncommon for mansions to have a secret room like this to hide in. If there's a break-in, a robbery, or some other emergency. This time it's my emergency. You're the one who wants to be medicated, so you'll lie there like a vegetable. Why do you need all this?" Helen didn't realize she was going to ask that question herself. Neither did Leo expect it. He was silent for a few moments. "Because you're mine," he finally said. "When you and I got married, you're the only one I belong to. I've never thought of leaving you or changing you, but you're always tearing yourself apart. But I won't let you go. You promised, Leo. But 1 million people get divorced." Helen said tiredly, "What makes you think our marriage is special? I think you're the one who's mentally ill, not me." "Be that as it may," he replied, holding back his anger. "Do you have to answer that question? Do you want to spend the time left before the birth in a human way? Or do you want to be locked up in here? Not humanly. It will be either way." Helen sighed. "You know, I don't care. It's up to you." "Okay," he said. "We'll give you another chance. Well, have something to eat tonight. Let's go upstairs." And Leo helped his wife up the steps, overcome that she couldn't do it alone. Helen knew she had to wait for the birth, but she could not have imagined the shock that awaited her. The young woman had packed a bag in advance with things she might need at the hospital. If Leo wished to check on her, well, there were no secrets. Nightgowns, hygiene items, a few books. And yet, as Helen looked at that bag, it represented to her the hope that she would be able to get out of here soon. But when it was time to go to the hospital, Leo said, "Will you give birth at home, dear?" Helen looked up, and there was pain in her eyes, as if he had hit her again. Yes, yes, her husband went on. The doctor is on his way. What is it that you don't like? In the old days, only the poor gave birth in maternity hospitals, and the rich had midwives. It was the order of the day, so I've organized this luxury for you. What kind of luxury is that? Helen bit her lip in pain. What about sterility? What if something goes wrong and you need an operation? There's no facilities at home. If there are problems, then we'll deal with them, Leo said nonchalantly. You're young, healthy. Everything should go as it should. To be honest, Helen soon didn't care who her doctor was, whether sterility would be assured for the next few hours. She felt like she was dying. The pain was so intense that the paramedics who arrived had to give her anesthesia. Maybe they did it out of mercy? Or maybe Leo had insisted, not wanting his wife's screams to be heard on the street. Even though their house was on the edge of the woods, it was still the edge of the street. When Helen came to, she didn't immediately realize where she was. Nothing hurt. It was blissfully light. For a while, she thought she had returned to her childhood and was lying on her bed in her parents' house. Then her vision began to focus and she saw a dark red that it took another effort to remember everything. Someone entered the room. Helen turned her head and saw Leo's face. His was as fearless and calm as ever, unbelievable. Who was born? Barely audible, she asked. We have a baby girl. Show her to me, Helen asked, and mentally added not at us, but at me. Then said Leo, I want you to show her to me. Helen's old stubbornness was definitely back. After all, it was me who gave birth to her. Now you get some sleep, and then I'll show her to you, Leo promised. Helen knew it was useless to ask, and she was in no condition to get up and leave to look for her daughter right now. She was very weak. As soon as she closed her eyes, she fell, either into sleep or unconsciousness. Leo did not deceive her when Helen woke up feeling better. Leo had brought her baby. Helen was afraid to hold her daughter in her arms, such a small, tiny newborn head. It required careful support. Is she all right? Helen asked, not noticing she was crying. She put her daughter to her breast. What did the doctors say? The girl is healthy. Let there be faith, Helen decided, gazing into the baby's face. She didn't need hope. It was something shaky and uncertain, driving happiness crazy. She needed a firm belief that they would both get out of this nightmare quest. Leo agreed nicely. There was no crib in the room, and as the newborn napped, Helen began to look around helplessly, where to put her. Let me carry the baby to her room. Leo held out his arms. I want her to live with me. Helen slowly. Okay, tomorrow we'll move the crib in here and move everything around. But you need to sleep well tonight so you won't be woken up by baby cries. You need to rest. Don't you realize I can hear her from any room? But still Helen gave her husband the baby. And he was right. Her strength was so exhausted that she slept soundly and dreamlessly that night. When she woke up in the morning, she realized she could try to get up. Leo brought her breakfast. Coffee, toast, jam, eggs. Bring it, Emily, demanded Helen. And noticing the strange expression on his face, she threatened him, or I'll definitely go on a hunger strike. Emily no longer lives in this house, he said. What? Helen's heart literally stopped. Don't be so scared. She's still doing fine. Only she will live somewhere else and other people will take care of her. And if you want to see her someday, you don't do anything stupid. That's the surest way to keep you in line, he added with a chuckle. Helen looked at him with horror. Are you a human being? She asked, shocked. And who is? Was there a grin on his face? You're just a crazy sadist. I understand that you are excited. There have been so many changes in your life yet, but I still control my behavior and my words. Unless you want to spend the rest of your life in an insane asylum. That's where you won't be seen, Emily. Her husband bowed slightly and left. From that day on, personal hell began for Helen. After a tantrum so violent she could have died or gone mad. There was a breakdown in her character. It was like she lost her will. She became submissive like a dog that wants to earn its master's approval. She now lived day by day, fulfilling all his wishes, so that on the first of every month he threw on her lap another picture of Emily. Here is the baby learning to lift her head, to roll over, to sit up. Here she was taking her first timid steps, stepping along the couch. Helen tried to understand where her daughter was, based on the surroundings. But only a white wall was in the photographer's field of vision, and this very worn cherry-colored couch. And of course, the baby. Helen had no doubt that it was her daughter, even though she had only seen the little girl once. It was undoubtedly her. Helen recognized Emily's face as her own. Same nose shape, slit, and eye color. Except that the girl's hair was blonde, like Leo's. From the outside, it might have seemed that Helen's situation was now better. She began to leave the house invariably in the company of her husband. But still now the two of them were seen in cafes, stores, 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 and parks. But Helen saw this freedom as a humiliation. If before she had nurtured in herself hatred for her husband and considered him crazy, now she was forced to pretend to be a happy wife. Leo had warned her if she tried the antics he said she would never see the baby again. And Helen knew her husband was capable of carrying out his threat, even if she managed to get to the police. And Leo would be apprehended. He just wouldn't reveal the secret where the girl was. How long would this torture last? Helen asked herself longingly, would it ever end? Would her husband abuse her? A year, 2, 3, or a lifetime? Her psyche was teetering on the brink. Helen was afraid that such a life would make her lose her mind. Now she was bound to Leo much more firmly than before by the word, and hoped to see her daughter someday. She and Leo got into the habit of stopping by the supermarket on Saturday nights and buying groceries for the week. One time, Helen was selecting an item in the dairy department, and Leo walked a little farther to pull a bottle of wine off the shelves. The unfamiliar young man quickly passed the young woman, but also dropped a carton of milk into her cart. Helen opened her mouth in surprise at first, then saw Sophia in the back of the store in the distance, making a hand sign to her. Everything was going as it should. Helen nodded involuntarily. They were not allowed to approach each other. Leo would stop it immediately, and there was no telling what Helen's punishment would be. Maybe he would lock her in the basement or beat her up again. He often raised his hand to her. Helen was used to enduring the pain. She didn't scream or cry now. She only flinched like a dog being kicked by a cruel master. When she and Leo arrived home, the first thing Helen did was look at the milk carton, and her pencil had written, "Your father is dying. No hope calling to say goodbye." And then all the skills Helen had recently acquired went out the window. She rushed to her husband. "I have to go home," she begged. He raised his eyebrows. "Why? Is father dying? I haven't seen him in years. I can never forgive myself if I don't say goodbye to him. You're not the ultimate monster. Let me go for a few days and I'll be back. I swear to you, or let's go together." He grabbed her chin. "How do you know about your father? Tell me," she blurted it out. It was the first thing that popped into her head. "I met a friend at the store." She said, "Don't lie." He didn't believe it for a second. "First of all, you weren't talking to anyone there. Secondly, if someone had told you about your father, you'd have told me right away. And you only found out about it now. Someone handed you the phone, wrote you a note. Tell me." Helen didn't see any other choice but to lay it on the line, did she? Maybe then he'd take pity and let her go to her father. She showed him the ill-fated box. "I see," he squinted. "You're not going anywhere. Father can die just fine without you. Leo, for God's sake." Helen knelt in front of her husband. "You realize you'll do a terrible thing if you don't let me go. Fate can forgive a lot of things, but it punishes for such things. The boomerang will come and it'll be interesting to watch." His tone hasn't even changed. It was just as cold and mocking. "And for being so eager to deceive me. Next month, there will be no pictures of you with." Helen had a terrible tantrum in her memory. She sobbed for hours locked in her room. And when she did want to come out, she realized that Leo's intention was not to let her out anytime soon. She spent about a week alone. It was good that the bedroom was connected to the bathroom. At least Helen was not thirsty. Her husband didn't bring her any food. It was a real prison. There were bars on the windows to keep out burglars. The view was of a high fence with a forest beyond. Helen didn't know when she would be released, but when Leo got the call to report that her father had died, her husband purposely came to the door so she could hear his voice. Leo expressed his condolences and said that unfortunately he and Helen could not make it to the funeral. Very busy with work. Well, as soon as they have a moment to spare, they'll come and look at it. It seemed like a week. Helen felt that her mind was tormented, and she could not tell exactly how many days had passed when Leo opened the door, could go downstairs and eat something. After that, Helen finally broke down. She became apolitical and indifferent to everything. She didn't care whether she stayed at home or followed her husband, and wherever he led her, keeping her head down. She did her homework, but she did it thorough as an automaton. When the housework was finished, she would sit or lie motionless, looking at one point. You couldn't tell whether she was immersed in her thoughts or in prostration. When Leo spoke to her, she answered him, but she answered the question. It was impossible to get a word out of her now. The question remained, why would he want such a broken doll? But it was as if he was satisfied that he had brought her to such a state that she walked like a mannequin without feelings, thoughts, and desires. That he had complete power over her. Something human appeared in Helen's gaze only when her husband placed another photograph of his daughter in front of her. She would stare at her for a long time, and the expression in her eyes would become sad, as if she were mentally talking to Emily. Then she put the pictures in the album and put it in someone's drawer. She knew that if she kept pulling out and looking at the pictures, Leo would throw the album away. Just like he destroyed everything she cared about, so she would pick up the album once a month just to put another picture in it. And so the years went by. One day, in a conversation between the couple, the number 18 came up. When Emily turns 18, I'll tell you. And then she'll decide for herself if she wants to see you. And if she does, I won't object. Helen decided to think of this day as the tipping point of her imprisonment, after which she would either have her freedom and her daughter, or she would be gone. Now she knew that it was possible not to make any effort for this not to take any sin on her soul. She would leave simply out of longing and despair. In the last month before that date, she knitted a beautiful blue shawl. It had once been her favorite color, and she hoped her daughter would like it. On the cherished day, she gave Leo the shawl package, asking him to give it to Emily for me. He grinned, but took the package. That day, he didn't come home for a long time. Helen had no doubt that he had gone to Faith. After all, she is his daughter after all, and celebrating her coming of age. When she heard the house gate open in the evening, she ran downstairs. Well, she asked. He could have taunted her by demanding, for example, that she serve him dinner first. But Leo would not do that. He handed her the package. Emily doesn't want to know you. Why not? Helen whispered with just her lips. Did you tell her what you did to me? And I told her you left her. And now you're sorry and you want to make amends. I never said a word to her about you before. Helen herself did not expect what would happen. Then she threw herself at her husband, forgetting everything. She beat him with her fists ineptly and desperately, and screamed like a man who had been hurt intolerably and painfully. Leo was so unaware of this that after only a few seconds he came to his senses, and twisted his wife, and dragged her down to the basement. Helen was lying on the floor. It was very difficult for her to move. She didn't even want to raise her head, not even to turn it. The only thing the woman wanted was for everything to end here and now. She knew that Leo had locked the door from the outside. Or rather, there was an English lock. Her husband pushed her inside and slammed the door shut. Sooner or later he would open it or he wouldn't. It was all the same. When Helen tried to pull herself up, her head fell helplessly to the floor and her broken nose bled again. But Leo had never beaten her to the point of mutilating her. One has to think now, too. Nothing was fixable. It hadn't happened. Just a cruel lesson. After a while, she'd be able to walk again like she used to. But things happened differently than Helen had envisioned. When the door swung open and Leo saw his wife, he even apparently thought he had overdone it. He walked over to her and bent over. Later, Helen felt as if it was not she who had acted, but some force. Instead, she tore at her husband's leg, in a sudden, sharp movement. And when he lost his balance for a few moments, she jumped up and dashed for the door. Only when the lock clicked behind her back, her tormentor still inside, did she catch her breath. Helen heard her husband banging on the door and shouting something. But she also knew that the door was tight and secure. Not something even a man could just kick down. Nevertheless, she couldn't allow herself to gather herself quietly. Acting quickly, she frantically changed into jeans and a thin sweater. She threw on a jacket, shoved a few changes of underwear and the essentials into her bag. She knew where the money and her husband's card were. She didn't need to cover her tracks. On the contrary, she wanted Leo to be punished. The money, the files. Everything seemed to be in place. An ordered cab pulled up. Helen gave her friend's address. If she wasn't at home, she should go to the hospital. We weren't home. She aghast when she saw Helen with her bat on the doorstep. The friends hugged and cried, and could not unclasp the embrace. Then Sophia oiled the abrasions. Helen applied ice to the biggest bruise. She made a sandwich and a cup of strong coffee. She wanted to pour brandy, but Helen stopped her. No, don't. First, you have to go to the hospital to get the bruises removed, and then to the police. That's what the friends did. Sophia didn't leave Helen alone. She held her hand. Helen felt like Leo was about to appear behind her, calling out to her. Right on top of him, she heard his voice and picked herself up time after time. Again, there was no way for him to get out of the secret room by himself. Helen had finished telling her story to Alex, and now sat looking at the sea. What happened next? He asked, silently. Next, the police came to Leo's house. He was released from his confinement and immediately detained. There was a trial. He got less time than I expected, only 2 years. That is, he was given more, but released after 2 years. When I found out about it, I immediately left town to come here. I'll have to go back soon. How have you been living all this time? Turns out my father left me a nice inheritance. And I also found out that Leo had deposited a large sum of money into my account. So money was no problem. That's good, because I couldn't work for a while. I was in treatment. I was very close to losing my mind. Maybe that's why they gave Leo a little bit of a pass. They thought I was crazy and that I was talking about him a lot. The beatings really couldn't be hidden. And your daughter? My ex-husband never said where she was. Not with the police, not in court. Helen shook her head, so I don't know anything. Wasn't he charged with kidnapping? He made it look like there was no baby, Helen said. There wasn't. And it's all in my sick imagination. It's a miracle that thanks to the testimony of Sophia and other people I know, it was possible to prove that he deprived me of my freedom. Why was he released so early? Alex was trying to figure it out. It doesn't make sense. I bought an apartment, said Helen. I had to have somewhere to live. But now I don't know how I'm going to get back. He'll be walking the streets of the same city. He won't leave me alone. I think he's got some kind of obsession with me. Don't you want to move? Asked Alex to another city. Start from scratch again. A naked man on bare ground. I don't have the strength for that. My father died with my stepmother and my siblings. I don't keep in touch. I only have a few girlfriends, and now I will be forced to leave them. But when I found out he was released, I became panicky, afraid to come home, to go into an empty apartment. I feel like they're waiting for me there, waiting for the door to open, for him to come out. When do you have to go back? Asked Alex. In 3 days, answered Helen. Alex's decision to move in with Helen was met by the young man's parents in a flurry. I didn't think I would live to see this, said the mother, making me remember scenes from novels. You realize that after this, no one will respect you. Getting involved with a woman 20 years older than you. Mom, how many times have I told you I'm not having an affair with Helen? Alex wasn't so hot-headed anymore. He said those words in a tired tone. She just needs help right now. Who are you trying to fool? She's a rich woman. She can hire any help she wants, not ask a student who has no extra time. We have to learn. Even if we believed you, no one will. You be labeled as someone who can be bought. And no decent girl. Maybe it's my problem finding girls. Alex was starting to get hot. You've already found one, my mother parried. That lady should retire soon. I understand her desire to find a young boy. Alex was packing his things, trying to control himself. Stop it. Father turned to his mother. You are going to agree that Alex will not come to us. Do you understand him? Yes, man to man, mother couldn't calm down. This Helen is my age. Let me get another student instead of you. What would you say then? The father switched to his son. If you don't want to live with us, maybe just rent an apartment. We'll help you pay for it. A lot of guys your age are living with girls. Why do you have such a strange choice? Are you going to drop out? Alex was already standing in the doorway. I'll drop out if everyone needs me while I'm in. He found it easier to breathe outside. Helen lived in a new house in the heart of the city. It overlooked a square. You could admire the fountains. Sitting on the loggia with a cup of coffee. Alex, the university was a short walk from here. Walking distance. He could be grateful to Helen for a separate room with its own balcony and all the furnishings of his dwelling. Not at all comparable to his parents' modest apartment. But he could see that she needed him more than she was letting on about it. Helen stayed out of his life completely, but she cared. Alex took a sabbatical and got a job. In the morning, when he was about to leave, she would make him coffee and make him something to eat, even though he asked her not to worry and not to get up so early. She would sit against him in the kitchen, watching him eat and smiling slightly. If he didn't speak himself, she was silent with her. But it was surprisingly easy to keep silent with Helen, as if we were on the same wavelength. He came rather late. When the fall came, it was already beginning to get dark. And again, they would sit together at the table. And there was Helen's incomparable coffee in small cups. And Alex more words from the left in the evening, often humorously told about how his day went. There was nothing to tell about Helen, except about books read and movies watched. But Alex noticed that she became calmer around him. Her face rounded a little. She lost her painful thinness. Her hair began to grow. Helen went to the hairdresser, made a hairstyle that suited her more than before. She even found a hobby. She started growing flowers. By the time she became a winter girl, the apartment was like a winter garden. I guess it was the earth that had drawn her to the land as she got older. Helen shrugged his shoulders. Returning, Alex often saw such a picture. Helen sits in an armchair, as if in a green thunderstorm of branches beating all over. Softly speaking sconces, and the woman is reading a book. Alex involuntarily noted that the woman remained beautiful, despite all that she had been through. If I ever get married, I would like such a mother-in-law, he thought, feeling that Helen gradually becomes for him a native person. But sometimes, when he woke up in the middle of the night, he saw a light in the kitchen. And that means that Helen again had a terrible dream, in which the door quietly opens and her ex-husband enters. And now until morning, she will sit, drink coffee, and listen. Would there be footsteps on the stairs? She realized that these were far-fetched fears, but she couldn't help it. From Leo's house, Helen had taken nothing with her except her personal belongings, a photo album, and a blue shawl she had knitted for her daughter. The shawl now hung in her room. Alex did not hide from her that he was trying to find her husband and daughter. But he didn't tell her the details. And when the young man disappeared for days at a time, Helen knew it had something to do with the search, but she never questioned it. It was too painful and intolerable for her to hope and then be disappointed. And so the year passed. Helen wanted to talk to Alex about his plans for the summer. She herself wanted to go somewhere to the north, maybe to Karelia. She couldn't stand the heat, and she thought if the young man wanted to, he could accompany her. If he has a girlfriend, let him take her with him. She's paying for the young people's room. Alex's presence gave her a semblance of family, but she didn't have time to talk about it. The day came when Alex knocked on her room. I need to talk to you. Helen looked up with frightened eyes. Did you find out something bad? Leo found me. We have to leave. Will you let me sit down? Settled across from Helen in the chair. Alex began to speak. I found out why your ex-husband was released. Of course, not only in connection with it, but this circumstance also played a big role. Leo went blind. as Helen asked in a whisper. There, when he was serving time, there was a fight in the zone. He got beat up pretty bad. Concussion and blindness. He was in the hospital for a long time, and he'll never see again. The doctors are sure he won't. But I wondered what he was. Why did he treat you like that? Because by the time you were married, he was already a wealthy, well-to-do man. And Emily, did you find out anything about Emily? Helen interrupted. Wait a minute. I was sure this behavior was more typical of someone from a marginalized background. But when I delved into all of this, he really had a rough childhood. After his father left, the family lived in blatant poverty. An old house, and there wasn't even heating with a stove and wood. The mother, whom Leo loved very much, began to drink first and then reached for other men. She would leave the house and spend the night somewhere. And the boy was left alone in the fuel rooms, sleeping in his jacket when she returned drunk, and often with some lonely woman bragging to her son about a new ring and a new dress. Leo asked Mom, "Why did you leave me for someone else?" "You have your whole life ahead of you," she said. "Mine is passing, and you can't give me anything right now, so don't judge me for taking from others." Maybe that's what gave him the incentive to get ahead at all costs and become a wealthy man. It was an attempt to prove something to his mother, but it failed. When Leo started earning well, his mother was already dead. A life of excess is no good. And when he met you, all his childhood complexes were realized. His mother didn't belong to him. She was always slipping away from him, swapping him for someone else. So he decided to make you all his, at any cost. At first, he thought you'd be his child. But then he realized you could leave with a baby in your arms. That's when he separated you and your daughter. He knew there was no better blackmail than a daughter. He may or may not give her back to you, and as long as he has the daughter, you'll be at his mercy. Then why did he take my hope away? He said Emily didn't want to hear from me. Alex shrugged. Maybe he was tired of playing this game for so many years. Maybe he just snapped. But he wasn't going to let you go for sure. In your face, he was definitely avenging his mother for his childhood. Where he hid his faith. That's what tormented Helen. Most of all, she's alive. He gave her to strangers to be adopted. Do you know anything about that? I know. Alex was silent for a few moments, and the woman held her breath. You have no idea who raised her. Who did? Your stepmother. He brought her the little girl and assured her that you had given her up. He's too busy with work to raise a girl. Maria really did love your father. Her own sons were grown, and she realized she couldn't give the professor's own granddaughter to an orphanage. So she raised Emily. Leo visited the girl, took pictures. Helen held her hand to her throat. She really hates me and doesn't want to know. She's at Maria's now. Come with me. Alex suggested it. I have something to show you. And I also want you to know this. I met with Vera and talked to her. Helen had long ago given the young man the keys to her car, and now the car was waiting for them at the entrance. From excitement, the woman did not realize where they were going. The city ended, the villages went on. Then the road turned into the forest. Finally, Alex stopped the car and shocked. Helen recognized the place where she and her husband had once spent their honeymoon. The cottage by the lake. It had recently rained and the air was filled with the smell of pine needles, earth, and leaves. There was a small pier next to the cottages. It was empty now. It seemed that there was not a single living soul here, but it only seemed so. Helen did not immediately see on the landing in front of the cottages in a chair sat a man from the worst with gray hair and dark glasses. Helen would not have recognized Leo, but reason told her that it was him. And standing next to him, leaning toward him, was a girl. She was saying something to the old man, stroking his arm. Then the girl threw her head down. She was as fair-haired as her mother. And with her noble features, she resembled her grandfather. For a minute, she and Helen looked back at each other. Helen wanted to walk toward Faith, but realized she couldn't move. Her legs were failing. Alex, apparently sensing her condition, took her firmly under the elbow. You are not angry that I decided to treat a little? He asked quietly. Helen did not immediately realize what he was talking about. Emily said something to her father and slowly walked towards them. The closer the girl came, the more Helen's doubts grew. No tests were needed here, no questions asked. This was her baby girl, the one she had given birth to and held in her arms only once in her life. About 10 paces away, Emily stopped. And only now Helen noticed that on the girl's shoulders lay a blue fishnet bundle. The handkerchief was the same one that had hung in Helen's room a while ago, and looking at which she believed that she would give it to her daughter someday.